Whenever you're ready to drift off, let your breath slow and your shoulders soften. Tonight we'll wander through quiet work that once held whole communities together, the kind of steady, useful labor that moves like a lullaby, nothing urgent, nothing sharp, only small actions repeated with care until day becomes evening. First, we'll stand in a sunlit room on the Greek mainland, where a palm-sized clay weight keeps a household loom calm while wool becomes cloth. Then we'll step into a Javanese foundry yard before dawn, where bellows breathe and bronze learns the round, patient voice of a gong. We'll sit beneath cedar rafters on a northern coast, watching older smoke right flavor and memory into salmon for winter. Finally, we'll follow a lamplit corridor in an English dockyard, a rope walk so long it feels like weather, where hemp is coaxed, step by step, into line. The pacing will be slow and descriptive. You'll hear soft tools and ordinary rooms hands that know their work, and materials that answer kindly. No sharp turns, sleep safe detail. If you doze, the stories will keep moving at the same gentle speed, ready to meet you wherever your thoughts land. If your blanket is settled and the room feels comfortable, let us begin in a whitewashed corner where warp threads hang like quiet rain and a small clay weight keeps time for cloth. The room is bright in a modest way. Morning light slides across a packed turf floor and climbs a whitewashed wall. A window without glass, but with a woven reed screen breathes the air in and out. In that softened square of day stands a warp-weighted loom, two upright posts, a crossbar, and a fall of threads that looks like gentle weather. At the bottom of those hanging threads, small clay weights dangle from cords. One of them, thumb-sized, pierced through the middle, rests against a length of wool warm from the room and from being held. The loom is simple, and that simplicity is a kind of wisdom. The warp threads hang freely, not stretched on a frame, but pulled down by gravity and clay. Each weight asks the thread above it to be steady. If a breeze turns the screen's reeds, the weights keep their promise, swinging barely at all, a pendulum so small the eye nearly misses it. The household begins its day around the loom. Bread sits on a shelf, cooling where yesterday's heat became this morning's comfort. A jug sweats faintly on the table, spring water carried while the light was still blue. A clay lamp pinched into a shallow boat sleeps after its night's work, a curl of soot drawing a crescent where flame practiced being small. The weaver ties her hair with a bit of linen and rubs her palms with a trace of olive oil so fibers won't raise their voices. She checks the heddle rod smooth sticks that hold selected warp threads forward, then lifts the shed bar to open a mouth in the hanging lines. The mouth is only a finger's width, but it is enough. The shuttle, a slim piece of wood wrapped with weft, slides through with a sound like a word breathed rather than spoken. Madder-dyed wool rides the shuttle's back, red softened by sun and time. The shuttle arrives in her other hand. She pats the weft into its seat with a comb of bone whose teeth know how to be firm without scolding. A gentle side note: in many Greek homes, weaving was part of the day's rhythm rather than a separate enterprise. Cloth for tunics, blankets, and sacks grew in the same rooms where cooking, mending, and talk happened. The clay weight does its part without opinion. Its cord, twisted from flax, is tied through its hole with a practical knot. The weight is neither rare nor decorated. It is exactly heavy enough. If a thread slackens, the weight encourages it. If the heddle's tug makes the thread ambitious, the weight reminds it to be neighborly. When the weaver places a new strand of weft and beats it home, The weight answers with the smallest, almost musical sway, barely motion, more like agreement. Outside, a hen announces an egg with the confidence of one who has done this before. A pot at the hearth murmurs, today it is lentils with leek, and a sprig of savory, the sprig set aside earlier on the window ledge to remind the cook not to forget. The smell is quiet and companionable. The weaver pauses to wet the shuttle's yarn end, twisting it sharper between finger and thumb so the next pass will thread itself easily. Wool underhand is springy, a little lanolin still living in it like a memory of hillside and sun. The weft line meets the warp grid and accepts the rules. Red crosses cream. A little woad blue waits on a second shuttle for a border that will trot along the cloth's edge, not complex, only cheerful. Patterns here don't declare themselves. They arrive one pass at a time until the eye, after many minutes, notices that a soft geometry has appeared. On a peg near the loom hangs a distaff with a dress of unspun wool, cloud-like and courteous. If the weaver's daughter comes through the room, she may take up the spindle, roll it along her thigh to teach it spin, and draw out a line of fiber as thin as a thought. The spindle will hum slow and obedient, each twist locked in with a pinch. If a draft sneaks through the reed screen, the clay weights keep the warp from fluttering into distraction. The loom and spindle share the room without arguing. A gentle side note, on a warp-weighted loom, cloth grows downward. Finished cloth is rolled up behind the crossbar while the working edge descends, steady as weather. The weights move up occasionally, cords are tied, so gravity can keep assisting without wearing the knot to a complaint. By mid-morning, fingertips have learned the day's tiny checklist. Lift the shed bar. Draw the weft through. Beat lightly. Glance at the selvage edge to be sure it remains straight, firm but not tight. Touch each weight in turn, just a brush to feel that cords remain sound. When the shuttle's yarn shrinks to a palm's width, wind more from the ball waiting in the basket. The ball is wound loosely so thread won't develop the kind of curl that pretends to be interesting. A cat steps into the room and pauses at the strip of shadow cast by the loom's uprights. She sits exactly where sun and shadow meet, as if she were a small inspector of boundaries. The weaver's foot shifts on the mat for comfort. The loom responds with a well-behaved creak. The comb of bone slips between teeth and warp to coax one eager thread back into line. The weight below that thread does most of the convincing with its quiet insistence. Down, steady, neighbor. The weaver's tunic brushes the loom now and then. It smells faintly of smoke and crush time from yesterday afternoon's garden work. On her wrist a narrow wool cord, braided by a child, moves with each motion like a tiny metronome keeping house time. When she rests her hands in her lap, the room deepens in quiet. Dust motes turn lazy arcs. Outside, footsteps pass. A greeting floats in and out again as if carried by a small boat. She sets the shuttle aside and readies one weight, not because it failed, but because cloth appreciates evenness the way bread appreciates salt. She shortens the cord a finger's width, knots, and tucks the tail, smoothing it along the warp as if praising a child for remembering a lesson. The weight swings once, then stops. Its clay surface holds the fingerprint of someone who pinched it from wet earth long ago. When the kiln baked it, that finger stayed in the weight the way a footprint stays in a path that later hardens to stone. A gentle side note, loom weights were common, sometimes bearing marks or numbers to group them by mass. But even unmarked, They collected the signatures of maker's thumb dents, fingernail crescents, a grit of chaff baked into the clay like a date no one bothered to write. The weaver raises the shed again, and the warp opens like a curtain. Talk generosity. The shuttle moves. The comb taps. The cat blinks. The lampsoot crescent keeps its place, a tiny moon that will be wiped away before evening. A neighbor's voice at the door asks if there will be time later to trade a measure of olives for a length of plain cloth. Yes, the weaver says, not looking away from the threads. After the sun turns, the neighbor leaves a small basket as a promise and goes. When the light has moved from the window to the wall and down toward the floor, she rests her hands, counts breaths, and listens to the loom's stillness. The weights hang true. The cloth has grown the width of her palm and half again. She touches the new edge with the back of a finger, the way one tests a loaf's crust. It is firm, not proud. The pattern that did not seem to exist an hour ago has found itself. She smiles without showing teeth, then sets the shuttle on the cloth to keep it from rolling and stands to stir the lentils. As steam rises and the room warms by a degree you can feel with your eyelids, the clay wheat cools slightly in the shade of the loom's fall. Its work continues even at rest. Gravity does not nap. The cord holds. The thread above it is ready when hands are ready. The day will bend around meals and visits and a trip to the courtyard well, and the loom will accept each pause as part of progress. When she sits again, she will lift the shed bar, and the mouth will open just as before, a steady invitation to continue a simple sentence. Through beat, touch, breathe. Midday arrives by changing the room's color. The sun slides a little farther, and the shadow of the loom's crossbar lays a narrow stripe along the floor like a ruler that measures time rather than cloth. The weight hangs where it should, cord neat, hole smooth from years of agreeing with fiber. A fly explores the reed screen and forgets what it wanted. The cat remembers a nap and keeps the thought. The weaver straightens her back, sets both feet square on the mat, and breathes once as if greeting a guest who is also a friend. She lifts the shed bar. Warp threads split into front and back with the obedience of a well-rehearsed chorus. The shuttle passes through. The comb nudges home. Her fingers travel along the selge, teaching it to be firm and polite, never pinched. The weight below that edge thread gives a small, approving tug, and the thread behaves. On a low stool nearby sits a shallow basket of clean fleece, cloud broken into handfuls. A second basket holds carded wool rolled into tidy nests, each one the size of a small orange. When the shuttle's weft dwindles to a last turning, she lays it aside and reaches for a nest. She drafts a slender ribbon with her right hand and lets her left palm roll a spindle along her thigh. The whorl hums. Twist climbs the drafting wool like water up a wick. A length of new yarn grows as if the spindle were taking dictation. She lets twist set, wins the spindle, and wins again, pausing to listen for the small squeak that means the hook at the spindle's head would appreciate a touch of oil. A fingertip dipped into a jar solves that conversation. A gentle side note. Many households spun and wove in the same breath. Spinning replenished the shuttle while the loom waited. The loom thanked the spindle by giving purpose to twist. Neither craft minded being interrupted for the other. She tests the new yarn against her forefinger springy, even enough, and ties it to the shuttle's end with a square knot that does not call attention to itself. The shuttle resumes its quiet journeys. Red weft crosses cream warp. The border of woad blue begins to appear as a thin, true line that will be a guide for the eye when the cloth is cut. The clay weight, palm warm from the room, watches as threads above it agree to the grid. When the heddles lift another set of warp forward, the weight keeps the rest from following too eagerly. The child who braided the narrow wool cord for her mother's wrist wanders in with a fig in both hands. She sits on the stool and eats the fruit slowly, skin and all, watching the shuttle's path as if it were a small boat crossing a quiet harbor. Seeds crack softly under her teeth. When she is finished, she wipes her fingers on the reed screen without being scolded. The screen appreciates sweetness in moderation and will dry in the sun. From the courtyard comes water in a clay jar, coal from the well, thin-necked so the grit is honest. A neighbor arrives to collect the promised measure of cloth. The weaver gestures to the beam where finished length has been rolled. They unroll just enough to see how light finds the weft, how the border's line does its small, careful job. The neighbor touches the cloth with the back of her knuckles, the way one warms hands near a brazier without asking for heat. Approval is a nod and a small lift of eyebrows. The measure is taken with a stick marked in finger widths, but also with a palm laid here and there as if to invite luck. An olive or two changes bowls. A thanks changes rooms. A gentle side note, measures lived in hands as much as in sticks, finger, span, cubit. Cloth was counted by these, as well as by the day it took to make. Before eating, the weaver checks her tools. The bone-comb's teeth receive a wipe with a cloth. A sliver of warp lint surrenders easily. The heddle rods, smooth and slightly dark where fingers travel, are turned once to share wear along their length. A loose knot at one warp bundle is shortened the width of a barley grain and retied. The clay weight beneath that bundle swings once, then steadies, rail earning down as if down had changed while bread was sliced. Lunch is quiet and kind. Lentils softened into humility, barley bread torn with thumbs, olives that carry sunlight, and a wedge of cheese that remembers salt. The cat is offered nothing and accepts that with dignity. The weight, doing nothing different, continues to do everything it is meant to do. Gravity is the loom's second weaver. After the bowl is rinsed, she returns to the shed bar and the shuttle. A small pattern begins in the red weft every eighth pass. A double tap of the comb gives the slightest emphasis, a rhythm you see only when you stop looking for it. The weight string creaks once, a sound like leather whispering to itself. In the basket, a sprig of thyme waits to be remembered for tonight's stew. Its scent rises as if curious about wool. A gentle side note, dyes in a workroom were usually the memory rather than the action. Madder roots boiled earlier had given their red to skeins. Woad was a plant turned to paste, then to cake, then to blue by air's slow encouragement. The loom saw color come in as settled fact. She pauses to examine the warp. One thread has fuzzed where it rubs a heddle loop. She pinches the fuzz away and smooths the thread with a damp fingertip. From a small bag she takes a narrow leather loop and slips it around the thread above the heddle, a tiny guard to share the burden. The weight below shifts barely, then resumes its patient pull. No thread is asked to be heroic here, each is asked to be consistent. The child returns with a spindle of her own, shorter, with a heavier whorl that insists on turning even when the drafter loses confidence. She rolls, drafts, pauses, smiles at the thread that has decided to be a thread. The weaver glances over and nods the nod that is praise without fuss. A strip of woven band tablet woven in a simple check lies on a peg. Later, it will become a belt or a binding. For now it is a reminder that narrow things and wide things are made from the same alphabet. Wine presses a little at the reed screen. The weights keep the warp from fluttering into disorder, each one a quiet punctuation mark. A moth taps the wall near the lampset crescent and chooses elsewhere. Footsteps pass again outside, slower now. The pot at the hearth is scrubbed and set upside down to dry. A hollow ring answers the tap of a wooden spoon. As afternoon softens, the cloth's length becomes a story you could tell to someone who had not been here to see it made. The red weft reads as a field, the blue border as a path. If she is generous with herself, the weaver might think of the finished length serving as a tunic once the heat drops, or as a blanket over someone's knees when winter learns to knock. She does not press the thought. Cloth likes to know its future without being asked to name it. She shifts the rolled beam, a hand's turn to raise the working edge back to comfortable height. The weights rise with it, cords gaining slack for a breath, then pulled straight again. A few are untied and move farther up the warp, knotting close to the new working line so gravity's persuasion stays even. Hands do this with economy and tie, slide, tie, smooth each motion, making the next motion easier. A gentle side note, warp-weighted looms are patient machines. They forgive long pauses, accept uneven days, and reward any small correction multiplied across hours. Their arithmetic is simple and therefore durable. The last light gathers under the rafters. The shuttle completes one more pass and rests on the cloth. She strokes the new edge once and lays the bone-comb teeth down across the warp to remind herself where to begin tomorrow. The lamp is coaxed into life with a twist of wick and a little oil. Flame finds calm as if it had been waiting all day for restraint. She wipes the soot crescent from the lamp's lip with a damp cloth and smiles at the clean curve that replaces it. The clay weight cools a finger's breadth as evening air moves in. It is still itself dense, modest, competent. If it remembers the potter's thumb that once pressed it, it keeps that memory folded inside, useful only as steadiness. Night will bring other work, mending, counting skeins, maybe a visit, but the loom has said enough. The weights hang without complaint, a small choir at rest. Tomorrow the mouth in the warp will open again, and weft will cross, and the weight will write its soft note of down, steady neighbor. Late afternoon light enters the room at an angle that makes every thread show its small shadow. The warp looks deeper, almost like a grove you could walk through if you were tiny enough. The clay weight dangles where its cord says it should, a quiet reminder that cloth is gravity disciplined into usefulness. The weaver warms her palms by rubbing them together once, then lays her fingers across the hanging threads as if greeting a row of old friends. She lifts the shed bar, and the warp divides. Those chosen by the heddles step forward, the rest wait calmly. The shuttle glides. The comb rests lightly and then taps with a touch that says, "Here and no farther." The selves behaves because the weight beneath it has been explaining manners all day. On a stool near the loom, a little jar of chalk sits open. Every 10 passes she draws a small tick on the whitewashed post, faint and easy to wipe later. The chalk marks count progress without hurrying anyone. A string knotted at regular intervals hangs nearby as another kind of memory. When the chalk reaches a handful of marks, she slips a thread into the cloth edge as a tally you can feel. Cloth respects numbers that live in both wall and weave. A gentle side note, keeping count with knots, chalk, or little inserted threads is older than most calendars. It lets a weaver repeat a border months later without asking fortune to help. The spindle returns to her lap between shuttlings. She drafts a narrow ribbon of wool while the shuttle rests, twist climbing with the same modest assurance the weight gives to warp. The whorl is a fired disc with a stamped ring of dots, perhaps once pressed with the back of a reed cut short. When she pauses, the spindle hangs from fresh thread and hums once, pleased with the idea of being useful. From the courtyard, a mortar speaks slow, deliberate thumps. Someone is crushing dried herbs for tomorrow's dye bath. Not for this cloth, but for another length that waits in the corner, a bundle bound with reed. Madder roots dry in netted bags hung where air can think about them. The child lifts one bag and inhales the dusty, sweet smell, then replaces it carefully, as if the roots might remember clumsy hands. The loom's weights are not all identical. A few are slightly heavier, shaped like pears rather than biscuits. Those hang along the width where warp groups carry the selge. Two lighter ones live near the center, where the weaver plans a thin band of linen to run like a whisper through the wool. She adjusts the pairs by touch, sliding one knot up the cord the width of a barley grain, and snugging it again. The weights answer with a single, almost friendly swing. A neighbor stops at the door with a basket of figs and a question about measuring cloth for a niece's wedding belt. They speak in spans and fingers, and how the belt will sit over a tunic that will be washed in seawater, then beaten soft on smooth stones. The neighbor traces the border with her index finger. Blue like the shore, she says, and the weaver points to the second shuttle where wool waits its turns. The neighbor leaves one fig on the window ledge as a promise to return. The cat relocates to the cool patch where sun has withdrawn. Tail wrapped, chin tucked, she listens to the comb's metronome. The lamp is not needed yet. Still, the weaver trims the wick and clears the lip of yesterday's soot, a small habit that will make dusk kind when dusk arrives. A gentle side note, in rooms like this, many tools simply waited: lamp, spindle, comb, each kept ready by tiny attentions done at the moment it was easiest to do them. A warped thread beside the blue border misbehaves. It has sliced a hairline groove into the heddle loop and likes to cling there. The weaver loosens it with a fingernail, then slides a spare loop fresh flax, softer over the troublemaker, and lifts the old loop off. She ties the new loop with a square knot and strokes the thread smooth. The weight below that bundle, which has been tugging all day, seems to release a breath no one else can hear. She lowers the shed and lifts again, testing the change. The thread flows now, obedient and calm. She taps the comb twice, a private punctuation, and resumes the shuttle's crossing. Red grows. Blue keeps to its quiet task along the edge like a path that does not need to go anywhere to be useful. In the far corner a basket holds winding cards, each with a little skein of undyed thread looped around it. One card carries linen spun from last year's harvest. Another holds a few lengths of goat hair collected from fence posts. She plans to weave a 2-finger band with linen weft later and hang it over the doorway to remind the house of cool mornings. Plans like this travel through the day the way a swallow crosses a courtyard, often, likely never in a straight line. The child, now holding the chalk as a scribe, asks if cloth can count the months. The weaver nods toward a folded length on the shelf. It bears a thin stripe where a different sheep's wool entered the weave during spring shearing. That was the week of early figs, he says, and the child nods solemnly, adding a short chalk tick, then wiping the old ones with the flat of her hand, amused by the clean wall. A gentle side note: textiles sometimes kept diaries in color and texture. No batch of yarn, different hands at the loom, a week of damp air. Not mistakes, but fingerprints of time. Air cools. The reed screen lifts and settles with the breeze. Small decisions. The weaver shifts the rolled beam again, bringing the working edge up and the weights with it. She readies 2 cords and redistributes 3 weights from bundles that have become proud to bundles that need courage. The knots she uses are practiced, a half knot snug flat, then turned under tails smooth along warp so they do not catch the shuttle. Her fingers make the sequence without thinking. Thinking is busy listening to wool. From the neighbor's yard a small grinder squeals, then quiets. Olive pits become powder to thicken a future awe for tools and hinges. The smell reaches the doorway, warm and slightly bitter. The weaver rubs a trace of olive oil on the bone cone's spine to keep it from drying under. Tomorrow's sun. She tests the cloth's hand. It has weight without stiffness. When she presses it against her cheek, it feels like a firm cloud. The blue border is narrow but trustworthy. The red field is even, not thirsty, not slack. She draws the final pass of the day and lays the shuttle across the warp again so it will be where she expects it at dawn. The comb goes teeth down, a small flag marking the next sentence. Before covering the loom with a cloth to keep dust from learning bad habits, she aunties 1 weight to admire it. The clay is a tawny gray with freckles of grit baked into it. A shallow indentation shows where a potter's finger once pressed it into shape on a lapboard. Around the hole, the edge is glossy from years of cord. She touches that gloss with the tip of a finger and returns the weight to its cord with a tiny nod that could be thanks. A bowl of water is brought to the threshold, and the child washes hands, cupping water so it does not splash where the floor meets the wall. Wet hands lift a spindle, droplets trace small circles on the packed earth and vanish. The cat watches this with the interest she gives to anything that proceeds calmly. Dusk arrives as a color rather than an event. The lamp accepts a flame. Its glow wraps the loom's uprights and pours down the warp the way moonlight pours down a rope. Outside, a voice calls a name and receives the right answer. The pot on the hearth sighs as if it has decided to be supper rather than an experiment. She covers the loom and ties the cover cloth with 2 cords that cross like a kind embrace. The weights now hidden still pull, still teach direction in the dark. Gravity does not mind linen covers. The weaver wipes her hands, sets the chalk aside, and turns the reed screen enough to invite cooler air. Tomorrow, the red field will extend, the blue path will continue its quiet errand, and the weights will resume their patient ministry of down and steady. After that, fulling, rinsing, drying on a rope under olive leaves. But all that can wait. For now, the warp breathes in the lamp's small weather, the room breathes with it, and the evening learns to be kind. Morning returns as a pale stripe on the wall, climbing with the steadiness the loom admires. The cover cloth is lifted, dust finds it has failed to settle where it wanted. Threads hang with the easy discipline of sleepers who wake already in step. The clay weight answers the lifting with 1 small nod, as if to say it did not stop during the night, which is true. Hands greet tools. The comb is tested against a thumb. Pedal loops receive a smoothing pinch. The shed bar rises and drops once to remember its path. The cord through the weight's hole is checked, no fray, no twist that would ask for attention at the wrong moment. The weaver rubs a breath of olive oil into her palms, then touches each upright with the kind of tap you give a doorframe on your way through rooms you love. The first passes come quietly. The shuttle glides, the comb persuades, and the border's blue keeps its pace along the cloth's edge. Chalk marks on the post gain a couple of new fledglings. The child appears with a small clay cup of water that has been kept cool in the courtyard jar and sets it at arm's reach. She examines the weight with intense courtesy and then presses the pad of one finger to the glossy ringer on its hole. "It knows a lot," she says. The weaver agrees. Today the plan is to take the cloth far enough that the working edge will need to rise again. That can bring a pause with a different sort of work, the rearranging and tying that keeps gravity an ally. The warp opens. Weft crosses. The weight continues its modest sermon. Down, even neighbor. Light begins to slide along the cord and across the weight's belly. Clay remembers fire and does not protest. A gentle side note: clay tools collect the day. They hold heat longer than wood, cool slower than bone, and store fingerprints the way a wall stores remarks you meant kindly. It makes them good company in rooms built on repetition. By late morning, she has turned the roll beam a handspan. The weights rise with the warp like a set of small moons tugged by a tide. Several cords are untied and shortened to finger width. The knots are made flat, their tails smooth along the warp so the shuttle won't learn curiosity. The heavier pear-shaped weights are shifted outward to guard the selvages. The lighter biscuits gather in the center. Each move is a small decision that will keep edges true when the cloth leaves the frame. While she knots, the child carries a shallow dish of clay powder, Fuller's earth patted fine. A pinch is rubbed into a warp that has grown shiny where a heddle liked it too much. The clay quiets friction. A second pinch goes on the bone comb's teeth. The comb thanks her by forgetting to catch lint. Not too much, the weaver reminds gently. Clay wants to help, not to be the story. A neighbor pauses at the doorway with a question about a little shrine ribbon. She wants a strip narrow enough to tie around a small olive bough when the family walks to the hill on market day. The weaver holds up a tablet-woven band from the peg to finger width, soft and obedient. "After this length leaves the beam," she says. The neighbor nods, leaving two sprigs of bay on the sill as a reminder that blessings are easier to give when something smells good. The day warms. The reed screen lifts in a light breeze. Shadows change their minds on the floor. The weight keeps the lower warp tidy when air tries to suggest a dance. Above, the heddle loops lift and lower in their practiced sequence. Below, the weight and its companions make sure the threads that are not invited to move remember that staying is also work. A gentle side note: staying is the craft of warps. Wefts travel and tell news, warps keep the house. At the midday pause, bread and olives return, this time with a spoon of goat curd that tastes like grass seen from far away. A sprig of thyme is crushed between finger and crust. The child is given the crust edge and the job of fetching the little jar of ashlie from the shelf, not for tasting, for later. She carries it as a trustworthy courier. Both hands are on its belly, as if escorting a polite bee. After the bowl is rinsed, the weft resumes. The red field grows. A thin line of undyed yarn appears at intervals, a counting thread that will be removed later but serves now as a fence post in a meadow. The cat, engaged in the delicate labor of doing nothing, shifts paw when the shuttle passes close. A fly forgets the window and remembers it again. Then comes a small interruption that has been saved for when mind and fingers feel like variety, and no heddle loop must be made. One warp thread near the center has begun to sigh when lifted, suggesting it would prefer softer company. She takes a length of flax thread, moistens it, and ties a fresh loop around the bar, sliding it into place with a thorn used for such tasks. The old loop slips off, and the new one receives the thread. The weight below becomes a fraction more relaxed, proof that small kindness travels. She tests the opening. The mouth between warp layers widens cleanly. The shuttle runs through as if the room has learned to breathe better. Good, she says, not to herself, but to the loom, which appreciates acknowledgment. By mid-afternoon, the cloth's descending edge approaches the length she planned. Time for the lift. She lays the comb across the warp, secures the shuttle so it will not walk, and loosens the lashing that holds finished cloth to the beam behind. With slow turns, the roll is advanced, woven fabric winds up and disappears like a stream going under a bridge. The working edge rises to comfortable height, the weights climb with it. A handful of cords are retied. Each knot is pressed flat with the nail of a thumb. The clay touches knuckle now and then and holds the memory of skin temperature for a thoughtful second. A gentle side note, these mid-weaving lifts are pauses that make entrance. They bring new posture to the body and fresh patience to the mind. The cloth is grateful, so are shoulders. A pot is set near the hearth with warm water and a whisper of ashly, nothing sharp, just enough to relax a test strip of cloth when the day's weaving ends. Fulling proper will come later, pressing and washing the entire length, but she likes to read a small sample while the pattern is still a rumor in the room. The shuttle makes a last crossing for the afternoon. The comb taps its little signature. She draws a spare thread through the selvedge and ties a loop, a mark that says stop here next time. The child brings the small scissors. Their bronze blades have learned to be decisive without snapping. The thread is trimmed. A breath is taken. Now the room becomes a different workshop. The test strip, woven yesterday beyond the border, is unwound, cut, and laid in the warm bowl. Ashly persuades wool to nap and settle. A pinch of clay sweetens water and takes adventuring oils out. She presses the strip gently between palms. The cloth answers by tightening into itself like a polite creature adjusting its coat. The child rinses the strip in cool water fetched new from the jar and squeezes without wringing. Squeeze, turn, squeeze, standing on a reed mat so drips choose the right path. A gentle side note, some fullers used harsher alpalas. Some used tread and song, some used stone basins and neighbors' good humor. In households, small pieces were coaxed with warm water, ash, and thyme. The strip is laid on a smooth board and patted into square with the edge of the hand. Sun from the window makes a rectangle on the board. The strip is rotated so both ends know fairness. When surface dries to a soft bloom, she lifts it against her cheek. It feels like purpose. Before covering the loom for evening, she visits the weights once more. Fingers travel the row, bumping each gently, listening for any that chime bell against wood and might need a chord shortened. All sound right, clay against air, not clay against complaint. The cord of one weight bears a tiny knot where the child once practiced making a loop. It holds so it stays. The loom, charitable, allows a small apprentice signature. The lamp is lit while the window still holds color. Its glow climbs the uprights and sketches the chords. The weight's round shadow rests on the warp like a coin dropped into deep water and seen from above. Outside, sandals murmur on the lane and a jar neck rains once against a step. Inside, surfaces settle, comb to peg, shuttle to cloth, cover cloth over all. The last thing she does is place a thread across the warp, not woven, simply laid a bookmark of fiber that says, "Here is where we will greet one another tomorrow." The clay weight hangs beneath, patient as weather. The room grows quieter than quiet. The warp inhales, exhales. The scent of thyme leaves and ashlight drifts to the door. The evening has decided to be easy. Tomorrow the cloth will find its length. The weights will be untied and set aside with a little bow, and the beam will give up what it has been keeping. After that, rinsing ropes, a shaded line, and hands smoothing edges until they accept being themselves. For tonight, gravity keeps watch so people do not have to. Morning breeze through the reed screen with the calm of a promise kept. The cover cloth is folded away. Threads stand ready, a quiet forest held upright by habit and cord. The tiny clay weight pierced smooth at the rim, thumb-sized rests against its strand as if it had stayed awake to mind the night. Perhaps it did. Gravity rarely asked for things. The weaver greets the room by touching each upright, then the heddle bar, then the comb. She tests the border's narrow blue with her eye and decides it will remain the same to the end. The shuttle sets out. Red glides across cream. The comb brings it home with a firm, kind tap. A second shuttle sleeps nearby, its woe-dyed weft looking like a strip of morning sky. The weight below the edge gives its invisible advice. Keep the line true, keep the neighbor close. A gentle side note, endings in weaving are simply beginnings that learn their manners. The last span requires the same slowness as the first. Soon the chalk ticks on the post reach the knot that marks almost there. She draws a counting thread through the selvage one small loop to say, "Stop at this lamp." The child arrives with the little jar of clay powder and sets it by habit where the comb can see it. The cat, sensing an afternoon of change, chooses the doorway to avoid decisions. The weaver lifts the shed and lowers it one more time with care that looks like ceremony and is, in fact, maintenance. The shuttle crosses. Tap. Cross again. Tap. A last pass for the blue border. The thread ends on the far side and is tucked with the bronze scissors tip under to neighbors, then smoothed flat with a fingernail. She lets the comb lie across the warp a moment, teeth down, a bookmark's weight, then takes it up for the final, gentle press. Now the loom changes from instrument to table. She loosens the lashing around the finish roll behind the beam, turns the bar with slow patience, and lets the woven length slide away from sight as if dipping under a bridge. The working edge rises, then rises again until only a hand's breadth remains. There, she weaves a narrow hem of linen weft, plain and durable, and a line of tight over-under meant for later folding. The weight's cord is shortened one last finger width so the selvage will not forget itself in the excitement. She ties off the weft with a discreet knot and threads the tail into the cloth's interior, stroke by stroke, so it disappears like a thought that has done its job. The shed opens for a final breath. The shuttle rests on the near beam. Her hands fold in her lap. She listens to the room's small stillness. Even the fly on the screen decides to postpone ambition. Cutting down is unhurried. The warp ends are lifted in small gatherings and snipped with room to spare. Threads fall into her basket like short tassels of rain. The weight feels the strand slacken and swings a faint farewell. The last ties are undone at the beam. Finished cloth comes forward in a slow, heavy ribbon, landing over her forearms with a pleasant pull, substantial, not showy. She lays it on the table plank and smooths a palm across the field. The blue path keeps its edge, the red field holds light without glare. A gentle side note, cloth fresh from the loom is honest about its day. Hairs stand a touch proud, edges carry the tension of work. Finishing teaches relaxation and memory. You are cloth now, not threads, considering their options. She plaits the loose warp ends into a simple fringe along one side and whips the other side's hem with small stitches in undyed wool. The needle's eye is a slit cut by a fine bone awl. The thread slides through like a cloud deciding to become a line. When the seam asks for a rest, she lets it rest. No pace here is forced. The bowl of warm water waits with a whisper of ashly and a pinch of clay. A smooth river stone sits in the bottom to remind hands where the edges. She lowers a section of cloth into the warmth and presses in calm, even motions, never wringing, only persuading. The wool responds by tightening into itself, surface becoming soft and orderly. The child leans to watch bubbles that look like tiny beads flee the weave and then vanish. Water darkens and smells faintly of lanolin and clean ash. The cloth is lifted, eased through cool water, pressed again between palms, and laid along a polished board. On the line in the courtyard, a rope waits in shade. She lays the cloth across it, half and half, then shifts it a little so the fold won't learn a sharp angle. A breeze does the quiet part of the work. The blue border dries first and looks like clear dawn. The red takes longer and becomes strawberry, then brick, then simply red that knows itself. She checks at intervals, patting corners into square, encouraging edges to lie with a finish that will please both hand and eye. While it dries, she tidies tools. Heddle loops are gathered on a cord so that they will not tangle. The bone comb is wiped and given a dab of oil along its spine. The shuttle is emptied, the last thread wound neat and tied around itself like a polite sleeping serpent. Then she lifts the clay weight from its cord. It sits in her palm with the authority of small, useful objects. On its hole the glossy ring catches light. She sets it on the windowsill to dry, then rubs a fingertip along the rim to feel the faint ridge where the potter's board once turned. It will return to work when work asks, but for a few hours it becomes an ornament that remembers labor. A gentle side note, many houses kept a few extra weights, some heavier, some light, stored in baskets by the loom. They were like friendly neighbors you could ask to help move furniture, always nearby, rarely praised, always necessary. The cloth on the rope becomes ready all at once, the way bread sometimes does. She lifts it, lets it drape over her forearms again, and brings it inside where the shade lets the weave show honestly. She snips a stray hair, smooths the hem with the flat of the needle, and folds the length twice, then again, so that the blue path becomes a border on four sides when you look at the folded piece. She sets the folded cloth on the table and places the bone comb on top as a paperweight that knows why it is there. Evening leans in. The neighbor returns with the olive measure and a quiet smile. They speak softly over the cloth. Fingers test the hand, eyes follow the border. The weaver names the price as a handful of olives, a jar of last year's honey farewell, and a promise to lend a spindle to the neighbor's niece. Bargain finished. The cloth is wrapped in a square of plain weave and tied with a braid the child made last winter. It leaves the room lighter than when it arrived, not because it weighs less, but because it is now part of an intention. The loom freed of its burden looks taller. The weights return to their cords or resting in a row on the sill make a small choir of circles. The cat stretches and selects the empty loom's shade, adjusting paws to the absence of hanging threads. The window accepts cooler air. A lamp is lit and kept low. Before covering the loom for the night, the weaver makes a little list in her head. Tomorrow she will work for the narrow band promised at the door. She will sort the dyed skeins and put the wove cakes back into their jar. She will oil the hinges of the chest where completed cloth sleeps. She will return the little clay weight to its usual place and feel for 1 second the coolness of its clay against skin as if shaking hands with a companion who did not speak but understood everything important. A gentle side note: objects used daily collect trust. We reach for them without looking, and they answer by being exactly where hands expect. She draws the cover cloth over the frame, ties it with 2 cords, and smooths the fold with a hand that smells faintly of thyme, oil, and clean wool. The lamp's circle fits the room. The wait's shadow on the sill looks like a small moon stalled just above the horizon. Outside, sandals whisper on stone, then even that stops. The day is satisfied. Now the story of threads can rest. Cloth knows its future, folded on the table. The loom knows tomorrow's project. The weight knows down, and will teach it again when asked. And as the lamp's quiet glow softens to a steady oval, we'll follow the promise of warmth into another workshop entirely toward a Javanese courtyard where bellow sigh molds weight under damp cloth, and bronze is taught to sing in long, round tones. Let us arrive before the light does. The foundry yard is a square of swept earth bordered by low, old bricks. Dew holds to the grass beyond the wall. In the yard, covered with damp cloth, sit round forms that smell faintly of beeswax and clay. A pair of bellows sleeps like 2 folded lungs beside a short furnace whose mouth is black with past fires. Somewhere beyond the mango trees, a rooster negotiates with morning. Here, work is already awake in a quiet way. A boy steps in first. He carries a broom made from the midribs of palm leaves bound with cord. He moves the knight's desk toward the corner, strokes even, unhurried. A man older, patient, comes after him and lifts the cloth from one of the forms. Under it is a wax model of a gong, white-faced, thick at the rim, with a raised central boss that catches the eye even in this gray hour. He rubs the boss with the pad of his thumb, feeling for smoothness rather than shine. The wax returns the touch with a dull, friendly luster. A gentle side note: this work uses lost wax Sire Purdue. A shape is first made in wax. Clay and ash embrace it to make a coat. Fire later asks the wax to leave, and bronze takes its seat. Nearby, a low table holds bowls of powders, rice husk, ash ground fine, clay softened with water, and charcoal dust like soft night. The man mixes these with his hands, lifting and folding until the blend holds together without becoming proud. The rice husk ash brings toughness, the charcoal temper, the clay memory. He pinches a bit between finger and thumb. If it cracks, more water. If it smears, more ash. When it feels like good bread dough that forgot to be food, he nods. The boy keeps time by tasks, not by bells. He wets strips of banana leaf and lays them over the wax rim, one after another, like a narrow green scarf. The damp leaf keeps the clay coat from grabbing too fast. The man begins to coat the wax, handfuls smoothed down with the heel of his hand, edges rounded the way rain rounds things. He works from boss to rim, covering evenly. A wooden tool, more suggestion than tool, helps him keep the curve true. He leaves a small, neat funnel at the rim and slender channels gates for air to escape later. He checks them twice. Bronze does not argue with good playing. On the wall's shaded shelf sits a jar of coconut oil, a bundle of palm fiber brushes, and a kettle blackened by useful years. The kettle is filled at a small well and set near a charcoal brazier that answers, with a respectful smolder. Tea leaves wait in a tin with a lid that fits. Sugar from palm sap, molded into brown cakes, sits under cloth. Work prefers warm tea it can ignore, and drink when the hands remember thirst. The second boy arrives, barefoot, with a sack of charcoal on his back and an apology in his eyes that no one requires. The sack makes a soft sigh as it rests on the ground. He splits a coconut shell with a practice tap and shows the older men the charcoal's grain-tight, glossy, good for a hot, clean fire. The man nods again, wordless approval that means more than talk. At the furnace, the boys unfold the bellows. Each is a stout leather bag fixed under a plank. A wooden handle runs along the top. They attach the bellows to the clay to an angled pipe that enters the furnace belly and test the seal with their palms. Warm breath will come later. Now they practice the rhythm. Step, press, release, step, press, release. The furnace answers with a soft hollow note, like a drum remarking on the day. A gentle side note, bellows here are treaded. Feet find a slow music that hands cannot hold for. Long, to boards, to bodies, one continuous breath. Scrap bronze is brought out an old cracked kettle, a broken tray, a bell whose sound became tired. The older man sorts by feel as much as by eye. Copper is the body, tin is the voice. Too much of one or the other and the metal will remember only strength or only brittleness. He is not weighing with scales today, he is weighing with years. He adds a small ingot that was cast last season, marked with a line across its face to say use for balance. The wax-coated form gains its outer shell, layer by patient layer. When it reaches the right thickness, a man's little finger, the surface is smooth with palm and brush. The funnel and vents are kept clear. The boy writes a small chalk mark near the funnel to days. Sign so later they can remember which mold belongs to which size. Names are not needed. Sequences are. Another cloth lifts from another wax gong. This one is larger, for a deeper voice. The boss is wider, the rim heavier. The older man measures with a string and not a simple looper on the boss, a long stretch to the rim numbers held in hemp rather than in ink. He adjusts the wax here and there with a warm spoon, wiping edges the way a baker finishes a loaf. He sets it aside under a damp cloth to wait its coat. The sun takes its time but arrives. Light finds the brazier first, then the bellows boards, then the hands. Tea is poured into small cups, and the sugar is broken, not dissolved, so sweetness arrives in polite intervals. A parcel of rice wrapped in banana leaf is opened, and inside are pinches of salt, a slice of omelet, and a few slender chilies that promise warmth without boasting. Mouths eat without pausing the work. The feet at the bellows learn their path so well they can keep it while a cup visits a lip. A gentle side note, meals in such yards are quick but kind. Rice and something tea. The day is long enough to make feasts unnecessary, and short enough to make hunger rare. The furnace is filled with charcoal. A twist of dried coconut frond takes flame and is tucked under the lowest layer. Smoke rises, white at first, then clears as heat persuades. The bellows begin their real duty. Step, press, release. Step, press, release. Air hurries through the tuyere and coaxes the charcoal into brightness. The furnace mouth shows a deep orange with a pulse at the edges. A clay crucible is set at the heart of the heat with long tongs that have learned to be steady without being stiff. Scrap bronze pieces are fed one by one, never crowding, always allowing space for heat to find every corner. The boys trade places without words when legs ask for a different set of muscles. The older man lifts a short iron rod and dips it into the crucible. It comes up glowing at the tip, a bead forming, then falling. He watches how it falls, how it pulls a thread of itself. This is how he hears temperature. On the ground, a shallow trench has been dug and filled with sand. The clay-coated moles now firm, and mat are set upright in the trench and braced with sand so they cannot learn to wander. Their funnels face up, their thin air vents show as delicate stems climbing to nowhere. The older man touches each vent with a finger to be sure it is open. Air that cannot leave will become quarrelsome later. He prefers peace. The wax inside the molds must leave before bronze may enter. For this, a smaller fire is built beside the trench. The molds are warmed slowly, bottoms first, then sides, then tops, so the wax can say its goodbyes without drama. Beads of melted wax begin to show at the vents. They are caught in a little clay boat and will be kept to become other shapes on other days. A smell of bees and smoke lifts, sweet and somber, and then thins. A gentle side note, wax is not lost when lost wax is practiced with thrift. It goes out to return later, changed only by memory. The crucible's surface becomes a sun the ice cannot visit. The older man sprinkles a pinch of ash over it. The ash gathers skin and carries it aside like a careful waiter. He turns the crucible with tongs so the metal's mouth faces the trench. The boys feel the heat on their shins and do not step back. The bellows keep time. Step, press, release. Not yet the pour. First he lifts the ladle clay-lined stout. Cherish checks its lip and warms it at the furnace mouth so hot metal will not be shocked. He tilts the crucible of breath, lets a little bronze kiss the ladle, and slide back, a greeting. The ladle then receives the true measure. It glows along its rim, as if remembering the sun. On the yard, the day has fully arrived. Bird song in the mango, a neighbor calling for a chicken that does not answer, the slow gullied sound of a cart beyond the wall. In the foundry, the sounds are narrower, bellows wood, charcoal's whisper, the soft thud of a palm on clay to test for readiness. He brings the ladle to the first mold, pauses, and looks for a sign only he can see. It is in the color, the smell, the way the metal surface breathes. He tilts. Bronze becomes a ribbon and disappears into the mold, a tidy river choosing a bed it already knows. Air escapes by the vents in thin, pale breaths. The funnel drinks, then stops on its own, full with enough and no more. We will watch, but we will not hurry. The second mold waits its turn. The bellows boards keep their rhythm. The yard is warm, but not yet hot. The gong's voice is a promise cooling in clay, and the promise is content to remain a promise a little longer. The first mold drinks and grows quiet. The second receives its share with the same careful tilt. Bronze slides into prepared darkness, folding itself round memory left by the wax. The vents exhale faint threads of vapor that stop when the hollows are full. The lads keep the bellows moving, less from necessity now than from courtesy to heat that has helped. The older man rests the ladle on a brick and watches the funnels. If a bead remains bright at a lip, he dusts it with a pinch of ash. The surface turns satiny and behaves. A gentle side note: pouring is not the end of fire's part. It is the beginning of waiting. Metal remembers the temperature it met and tells that story with patience as it cools. When all the prepared molds are fed free today, each for a different voice, the crucible is eased from the furnace and tipped to empty the last bright mouthful into a small, shallow ingot mold. For balance, the man murmurs the same phrase he used when sorting scrap. The furnace is closed with bricks to teach its heat to leave slowly. The bellows boards are leaned against the wall, sleeping in a position that keeps leather from learning creases. Now the yard turns to quiet maintenance. The wax cut earlier in the clay boat is scraped into a cupboard pot for warming and straining another day. Tools are wiped with ash and a trace of oil so they will forget soot. Tea returns to hands that have only now remembered thirst. The boys blow on their cups at the same time and pretend not to notice they have done so. Heat thins as morning climbs. The molds sit in their sand like three patient turtles, the funnels no longer shining, only dark with promise. The older man presses his palm lightly to one mold side and listens with his hand. Still too warm. He nods to this truth and does nothing dramatic, which is its own craft. A wrapped parcel of rice appears from a basket, the banana leaf opened to show grains that still remember steam, a strip of salted fish, and a few slices of cucumber folded like small cool moons. They eat in the shade. Work has a way of folding meals into itself without misplacing them. A neighbor drops by with a sack of broken brass buckles and two old cymbals. "For next time," she says. "For the smaller ones," he answers, understanding the weight of her gesture. When the molds have decided to be touched, the man taps one with a wooden mallet, soft, testing. The sound returned is duller than clay and not yet bronze. That is correct. He taps again, listening for any complaint that might mean a void. There is none. He takes up a small hammer with a crossbeam and begins to loosen the outer shell. The boys brush away sand, then lift the mold with care onto a plank. A few well-placed strikes, and a seam opens. Clay flakes in obedient leaves. Beneath, metal appears not bright, but the brown gold of an object that has only just become itself. A gentle side note: the phrase knocking out can sound impatient. Here it is more like unwrapping. Clay and bronze agree to part. Neither is hard. The gong emerges with its runners and vents still attached. A bronze funnel, thin stems climbing from the surface like small roots, all to be cut away. The boss stands proud and undecorated. The man lifts the piece with tongs to a low bench. He takes up a chisel and, with measured blows, removes the gates, the places where they will later be ground flush and made to forget. A bucket of water sits ready. A sandstone block lies beside it, its face smoothed by generations of circles. The older man wets the stone and sets the gong so the rim rests against it. With both hands he draws the metal in slow arcs, turning, drawing, turning, hushing away roughness. The sound is sand against bronze, patient, persuasive. The boys take turns at this, their faces composed the way faces look when they discover rhythm they can keep. From time to time he lifts the gong and taps the boss with a wrapped mallet wood padded with cloth to protect both sound and surface. The voice answers, not yet round, a little cloudy at the edges, but carrying a center that will be encouraged. He listens, not for pitch alone, but for the way the tone blooms and returns. He nods to himself at something he hears that no one else hears yet. Another gentle side note. Tuning a gong is not quite raising or lowering note like turning a peg on a string. It is shaping how the voice opens, how long it lives, which parts of the metal are asked to speak more, which to speak less. Small changes do great work. Files come forward curved flat, and a narrow one that has learned secrets. With chalk teeth, they travel the inner face near the boss and along the rim in careful patterns. A few scrapes near the center warm the tone. A few at the shoulder allow the voice to carry. He tests often, never allowing impatience to flirt with the file. Between tests he dampens a hand with water and lays it along the rim to still extra shimmer. He wants to hear the central truth of the note. Tamarind water waits in a bowl, pulp soaked and stirred until it becomes a mild, sour bath. A handful of husk ashes rubbed into the metal with coconut fiber to lift the soot and any clinging clay, then the tamarind water washes the surface to a gentle, even glow. The bronze responds, its color deepening to honey with the kind of quiet luster that does not chase mirrors. Holes for hanging are marked opposite each other near the rim, where weight will be balanced. Some gongs have cast lugs, today's does not, so he drills with a bow drill that hums like a bee. The bit bites slowly, a trickle of metal dust collects in a neat cone. He saves the filings in a small tin. No metal is without a future. A cord is braided from rattan, passed through the holes, and tied with a knot that will sit flat and mind its place. They stand the gong upright, and the older man leans it against a padded post. He taps the boss again with the wrapped mallet. The tone is rounder now, a low vowel that fills the yard without boasting. He closes his eyes for a breath and hears how it might join neighbors that do not yet exist today but will. The boys smile at each other, surprised that metal can sound like a room with walls you cannot see. He does not decide it finished yet. He turns the gong to the bench once more and makes 3 light scrapes on the inner shoulder, as if removing a whisper that kept interrupting. Another test. The voice opens cleaner, sustains without wobble, then sits down politely. He tests a second spot near the rim with a tap of a light hammer, just a suggestion to remind stiffness to loosen. The metal answers with a slight shift in the way the overtones braid themselves. Tea returns. The cups are not washed, a little soot on the lip is ordinary. The heat carries sugar's gentle courage. A breeze finds the yard, and dry as the tamarind water where it had pooled. The neighbor from earlier has lingered at the gate. She hears the test tones and tilts her head. Like rain beginning, she says, pleased. The older man grins the kind of grin that is mostly eyes. They knock out the second mold, then the third. Each has its own temper. One bears a small sand inclusion at the edge. It will be filed and forgotten. Another shows a slight ripple where wax cooled too quickly. The ripple will remain as a memory you cannot see after finishing. Each new voice is brought to the stone, then to the file, then to tamarind, then to the mallet. The yard becomes a phrase spoken 3 times in related keys. A gentle side note sets our families. A large gong may ask smaller ones to stand nearer or farther in pitch. The maker listens forward, as if hearing ceremonies not yet held and steps not yet taken. When the sun tilts, the yard is a careful gallery, 3 gongs leaning, each on its rattan cord, faces washed, bosses smoothed, rims true. The boys sweep again, this time gathering clay flakes and a little bronze glitter into a pan. The wax boat is covered. The bellows are folded but left where the furnace can see them, so tomorrow's fire will not feel alone. The drill bit is oiled and slipped back into its wooden nest. Before they go, he taps each gong once, then twice, boss for the core, rim for the halo. Voices answer in order deep and bright, then a slightly higher nephew. He listens to the way they overlap and smiles, not in pride exactly, but in the way someone smiles when something sits in the right place without being told. The yard will grow quiet now. Bronze will cool the last of the day from itself. In the morning cords will be dressed with new knots, a few more scrapes may be asked, and someone will come to try a voice with hands that intend music. For tonight, the gongs lean in the shade, and the air around them seems already to hum, not audibly, only the way warm wood hums when it is thinking. Morning returns with a light that remembers yesterday. The yard smells of cooled charcoal, clay dust, and the faint sour sweet of tamarind water left in a bowl. 3 gongs lean like patient moons along the shaded wall. The older man arrives first and touches each boss with his palm, the way a baker might rest a hand on loaves that slept near the hearth. Metal is cool and willing. On a mat he lays out quiet tools, chalked files, a curved scraper, a light hammer with a rounded face, coconut fiber wads, a stick of wax, a small bowl with fine ash, and a folded cloth that will become a pillow beneath each rim. A new cord of rattan is split with a thumbnail and smoothed between his fingers until it lies flat, and listens. He hums not a tune, just a simple vowel that keeps company with breath. A gentle side note. Many workshops began with arranging tools the way a reader lays out pages. The order is not ceremony, it is permission for attention to behave. He lifts the largest gong onto the pillow and nudges the wren until the face leans just so. The wrapped mallet greets the boss. The note blooms low, warm, a little shy in the corners. He nods and chalks a pale mark on the back shoulder where the metal's thickness tells the voice how long to linger. 3 careful scrapes, each no wider than a grain of rice, leave dull lines that catch the light. Another tap, the note opens more clearly, sustains, then returns to stillness as if it remembers home. The boys arrive with water from the well and the tin of sugar. They pour tea and a nast, set 1 cup on the brick near his knee. Feet are bare, steps soft. One boy takes the coconut fiber and rubs the rim with ash until the bronze loses its handling prints and keeps only purpose. The other boy turns the rattan cord in his hands the way a rope walker might test a line before trusting it with a step. A neighbor, the drum maker, peers at the gate holding a thin goat skin stretched on a hoop. He listens to the gongs test with head tilted. Rim of fingers, patience brighter, he whispers. The older man smiles and faces the gong again. Near the outer edge he makes 3 tiny pauses with the curved scraper, just enough to teach the overtone to tuck its shirt in. Tap. The low vowel becomes rounder. A fade higher rim light lies over it like morning haze. The drum maker nods and drifts away, his own day waiting. A gentle side note, advice between crafts traveled lightly, one word at a time, never a lecture. Metal listened to wood, wood listened back. They raise a simple stand in the yard to posts, and a crossbeam padded with wrapped cloth. The older man threads the rattan cord through the holes near the rim, and ties a flat nut that will not twist when the gong breathes. The instrument hangs and finds its center. He taps the boss, then the rim, then the space between. Each place answers with a voice related to the others, like families speaking in their own timbers. The boys grin at the way air seems to thicken and then thin, as if the yard itself had taken a careful inhale. He moves to the second gong. This one is meant to sit a step above the first. Its boss is slightly smaller, its face a shade lighter under Tamarin's hand. The first test is pretty but forward. The note rushes and collapses. He dampens to fingers and touches the shoulder while tapping, listening for the piece that wants restraint. A few file strokes near the waist, no more than you'd pair from a fingernail, invite calm. Another tap. The voice steadies, learns to walk rather than hurry. Between tests, a thread of beeswax is worn between forefinger and thumb and run lightly along the drilled holes to comfort the cord. The knot is pressed flat with the back of the nail. A small convenience. Wax keeps squeaks from pretending to be tones. By mid-morning the 3 gongs stand in order, their chords like quiet tales. Each has been filed in whispers, the chalk wiped, the tamarind cloth passed and repassed until bronze shows that kind of soft glow that looks like breath made visible. The older man lines them along the stand and hums through his teeth, then taps boss, 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 low, middle, nephew. The sequence sits as if it had been waiting all week for the chance to agree. A gentle side note, no one here speaks of scales as written lines. Pitches are a habit of the year, a place in the day, a memory in the feet. You know the second note because you know the first and the third. The boys fetch mallets. Heads are wrapped in layered cloth, old sarong strips bound over wood with a tightness proportional to voice. The largest gong receives the thickest wrap, so the strike is a hug rather than a knock. They practice the hold, not a fist, not a pinch, but a cradle that lets the head land square and lift without shame. One boy tries a stroke and leaves the mallet pressed, a heartbeat too long, the tone muffles. The older man shows the lift, tap and away, like touching water and keeping your sleeve dry. They try patterns that are not yet music, only tests of balance. Low, pause, middle, low, nephew, low. The air gathers each note and returns it to the yard with the edges softened, as if the mango leaves had contributed cotton. A neighbor walking past slows and smiles without stopping. Lunch arrives in banana leaf, again rice, a spoon of vegetable stew with slices of long bean, a shard of salted fish that tastes like tide and sun. They eat in the patch of shade favored by the bellows boards. Tea follows, not hot now, but sweet enough to teach legs to enjoy the afternoon. The older man wipes the file teeth with a sliver of chalk and taps the stone once with the handle, a small thank you to grit and water. Work shifts from shaping to listening. He hangs two gongs side by side and plays them in pairs, low with middle, middle with nephew, standing where the sound meets and making tiny pencil marks on the back where a shade of brightness or a faint wobble wants attention. Those marks become to file strokes, 3 at most. He never files and then listens. He listens, files, listens again, always asking the metal to lead. A gentle side note: finishing is less doing than deciding when to stop. Stopping at the right breath leaves room for wood sticks, room air, and other hands to complete the sentence. Near the end of the afternoon he invites the drum maker back and, with a shy request, the boy who practices the small wooden xylophone down the lane. They line the gongs on the stand and give them to these other hands. The drum's low skin thrum meets the bronze with a dignity that makes everyone's shoulders drop. The boy taps a simple figure left, right, rest, and the middle gong folds over his pattern like shade over water. No one says good, they simply breathe. The older man takes a brush of soft fibers and lays a film of oil coconut, scented faintly with lime peel, across each face. It is not for gloss, it is for kindness against sweat and weather. He threads each cord through a narrow bead carved of wood so that nuts will not creep. The beads sit like small brown moons. The tools go back to their places, each wiped, each thanked without words. As the light thins, he makes one last test, not for tone but for rest. He taps the boss so softly that only the stand feels it, and waits for the metal to show whether any edge still holds tension. The gong loosens a fraction, then is still. That is the answer he wanted. The boys sweep. Clay flakes and bronze filings gather into small categories, this for return to wax, this for tomorrow's melt, this for the path where grit can keep boots honest. The tamarind bowl is rinsed and turned upside down so ants will not write essays. The bellows boards are leaned in their sleeping posture. The furnace door is patted the way a well is patted after drawing water to gentle taps to close the day. A gentle side note: some workshops thank their tools. Not with words exactly, but with the habit of putting them away in a way that promised tomorrow. The neighbor with the buckles returns at last light. She listens from the gate as the largest gong is struck once. The note hangs, thins, and becomes a memory that seems to keep the yard together for a breath longer than sound can travel. For the meeting on, she says. The older man nods. For steps that agree, he answers. They wrapped each gong in woven mats that smell of last year's sun. Rattan cords are coiled and tied, mallets laid in a bundle with cloth corners tucked so nothing will learn to wander. The stand is disassembled into posts and beam, each labeled with a small charcoal dot to help them find one another in any field. Evening leans in for real. Crickets begin their arithmetic. A neighbor's lamp trims itself to a small, steady oval. The gongs stand ready to leave in the morning, resting without needing sleep, bronze having learned its lesson, to take breath from a hand and return it as a circle of patience. Tomorrow there will be careful carrying, knots learned by shoulders, and the pleasure of hearing these voices in a larger room where answers come back from rafters. But for now, the yard is a bowl that holds quiet. Morning begins with lifting and not knowledge. The 3 gongs, wrapped in woven mats that smell faintly of old sun, wait on their edges. Rattan cords are coiled like patient snakes. 2 bamboo poles lean against the wall, their shoulders wrapped with banana sheath to soften weight. The older man checks each tie the way one checks a door before leaving, palm to knot, tug, a small nod. The boys slip cords under the mats and around the frames, then pass the loops over the poles so two people can carry each instrument without asking wrists to be heroic. A gentle side note, bamboo poles for carrying were not only strength, they were conversation. The spring in the comb took the jar from Bones and returned it to the ground. They lift together on the man's breath. The poles accept the load and sag exactly as much as they should. Sandals find the yard's packed path, then the lane, then the narrow ridge between rice paddies where dew sits like beads on a bracelet. Egrets rearrange themselves a few steps away. A frog practices a single syllable. The boy's feet learn the pitch of mud that can be trusted and mud that prefers to be observed. When a wheel rut in the lane dictates a smaller step, the bamboo answers with a soft, woody groan that is more advice than complaint. At the bend, a neighbor joins them with a coil of extra rattan and a length of cloth for padding. She falls into step without formal welcome. Everyone knows what they are carrying by the way they walk. The road gives them smells in order: wet earth, young rice, wood smoke from a cook fire, then the clean, resin-laced air under teak trees near the village center. The pendopo waits, an open pavilion with a tiled roof held by carved posts. Morning light enters from every side as a polite guest, filtered through rolled bamboo blinds that can be lowered when the day has learned impatience. A broom of split bamboo lies near the steps. The floor, smooth boards burnished by many feet, is already swept. Tea kettles live on a brick hearth in the corner. Today one jokes with steam while palm sugar cakes keep their shapes under cloth. They set the gongs down on folded mats, upright, patient. Wrappings are loosened and rolled away, then shaken outside to remind dust that hospitality is not limitless. The older man wipes each face with a soft cloth, removing travel's fingerprints and giving bronze a small attention that says you are inside now. The boys bring the stand pieces, posts, padded crossbeam, and marry them with pegs that remember their sockets. A bead of ore eases a stubborn joint. The wood replies by agreeing. A gentle side note, rooms shape sound. The same gong that seemed shy in a yard may stand taller under a high roof with friendly rafters. Finishing always includes listening to walls. The new rattan cords pass through the rim holes and around the padded beam. Knots are tied flat. Wooden beads slide into place to keep loops from creeping. The oldest gong is lifted to its height, high enough to breathe, low enough for hands to find the boss without reaching. The older man steps back and looks, not only at height but at how the face greets the rune. He adjusts a finger's width. He waits. The rune seems to nod. He taps the boss with the wrapped mallet lightly, like asking a name rather than shouting it. The note opens, walks through the pavilion, touches the carved beams, and returns itself diminished and clarified, as if the room had brushed it and sent it back tidier. He taps the wren. Overtones braid themselves and then lie down. The boys grin at the ceiling as though sound were a friendly bird that might be visible if they were polite enough. The second and third gongs hang in their places, cords smooth flat, not squared. Between tests, the older man rubs a little oil near each hole so rattan will not promise to squeak later. The drum maker arrives and leans his instrument, a double-headed drum, against a post as one leans a walking stick. He sets a stool, nods to the boys, and sits without urgency. They begin not with music but with manners. The older man shows the boys the breath before a strike, the way the mallet hand relaxes, how the other hand steadies the rim without owning it. Tap, lift, tap, lift. The drum maker offers a soft heartbeat to tones alternating, then resting. The large gong answers only sometimes, like a bell that knows it is guardian of the paragraph, not its every sentence. The middle inserts itself between phrases, the smallest threads a quiet line that feels like a path behind the house. A gentle side note, some gongs mark the end of a cycle more than they shout the measure. Their job is to remind everyone that a circle has closed by opening one more breath. A caretaker of the pavilion arrives with a cloth dipped in wine-scented water and wipes the carved post caps. He pauses to listen, not to judge but to remember where the sound sits best at this hour. He places 3 straw mats for sitters and a shallow brass tray for betel and chalk, the chalk mainly theater today. He sets a small bowl of rice huskash near the stand so hands can be dusted if oil from skin starts to make grips bold. After a few rounds of tap and listen, the older man hears a thin brightness at the middle gong's shoulder that the yard did not show him. He leans the face against a rolled cloth and, with the smallest curved scraper, makes 2 strokes on the inner surface where the chalk mark finds in. Dust rises, a sweetness of bronze powder that will be saved. Another tap. The extra light has learned to tuck itself in. He does nothing more. Enough is often the best seasoning. Tea travels like truth, small cups changing hands at natural pauses. The boys sip and keep shoulders softened. The drum maker uses the tea to teach a mallet student how not to rush drink as you would strike. No slosh. The student laughs by closing his eyes instead of opening his mouth. Children appear and disappear at the steps, bringing with them the polite weather of curiosity. They are waved closer, then waved farther, then settle at the exact right distance. One imitates the older man's listening face, a little head tilt, eyes soft, mouth a straight line that promises nothing and receives everything. By midday, the stand is dressed as it will be for a while. A length of dyed cloth is tied above the crossbeam to keep dust from dreaming of landing. Spare mallets hang in pairs, heads wrapped in cloth that once was part of a sarong patterned with small white commas. On the post, a length of rattan with knots at intervals is hung as a measure. Today's heights are matched to knots 3, 5, and 7. Someone takes a piece of charcoal and makes a dot on the post near each knot, a map to help the room remember itself if cords shift. A gentle side note, humidity changes pitch by a hair, so does tired rattan. Marks satisfy the part of the mind that appreciates being shown where true lies. Lunch is not formal. Rice and leaf packets appears, joined by a few skewers of grilled tempeh and a tiny dish of salt. No one touches the bronze until mouths have finished and hands have been wiped on damp cloths. After lunch, the older man strikes each gong once, and then leaves them alone for 5 minutes, listening to silence refill the pavilion from the far edges. He has learned that metal, like people, does better after a pause. Then the set is tested as a family. The drum offers a pulse, the small wooden keys of a xylophone speak soft syllables, the gongs answer with patience. Low at the end of the cycle, middle where breath turns, small where a corner needs light. It is not a rehearsal, not a performance, simply neighbors discovering how to inhabit a room together. The caretaker brings a ledger with soft pages and writes a few tidy lines. Date maker, 3 voices, chords renewed, stands fitted. He draws a small circle, by the word boss and shades it in a private icon meaning sound content. The older man watches the neat hand and feels the agreeable weight of being recorded. Afternoon thins. The bamboo blinds are half lowered, turning sun into even shade. A gecko whispers along a beam and stops near a knot as if listening too. The older man inspects each knot at the cords and presses them flat again with his thumbnail. He powders his hands lightly with ash, then wipes them clean, not out of superstition, simply because he likes to close work without bringing dust home. Before wrapping up, he shows the caretaker the simple care: a cloth kept near for wiping, a film of oil once in a while, mallets always hung not tossed, cords checked when the season changes, covers lowered when the pavilion sleeps. The caretaker nods where a nod belongs. The boys gather filings and tuck them into the small tin, a future ingot is being born a grain at a time. Evening steps toward the village across paddies that have learned to mirror sky. The Gongs, now residents of the pavilion, receive one last greeting tap, no more than the pressure of a thoughtful knock. Voices answer as if from the center of the room, not from metal. The older man ties the cloth cover above the beam and smooths it with the back of his hand. He thanks the posts, again not with words, and looks at the boys' feet to be sure they have not stolen splinters. Tomorrow the gongs will be part of a longer day marking beginnings and ends, asking feet to agree with one another, teaching time to travel in circles rather than lines. The foundry yard will go on without them, making other voices, other sizes. But for tonight bronze rests in air that smells of teak and pumped sugar tea, settled among quiet tools and attentive walls. Dawn begins in the pavilion as a change in temperature more than a change in color. Cool air slips across the floorboards and rests in the hollows between posts. The three gongs wait under their light cloth cords, quiet, knots asleep. The caretaker empties each cover and folds it along the same creases as yesterday's soap cloth, and habit can remain friends. He wipes the bosses with a soft square of cotton that smells faintly of lime and wood smoke. The pavilion answers by feeling ready. The older man arrives with a wrapped bundle that holds 2 extra mallets and a small bottle of oil. He sets the bundle by the post and greets each instrument with a tap barely stronger than touch. The low voice stands like a warm doorway. The middle answers with a measured breath. The smaller adds a pale ring that sits behind its elders. He listens from 3 places, near the beam halfway back, and finally at the edge of the pavilion where the lane begins. The notes carry differently in each spot, as intended, a kind of soft map drawn in air. A gentle side note: runes teach instruments how to be generous. An open hall allows sound to travel and return without picking up the sharp corners that walls sometimes lend. Neighbors lay out mats in easy rows. A brass tray appears with betel leaves and small white lime pellets, mostly for courtesy. A jug of tea takes its place near the hearth. Sugar from palm sap rests under cloth. Children are asked only once to keep their feet off the polished boards, and everyone else follows the suggestion. Sandals come off by the steps and make a low woven crescent that draws itself without instruction. The drum maker arrives, carrying his double-headed drum with the care you would give a sleeping child. He sits close to the big gong and tests the heads with 2 fingers, one then the other, listening for a polite, hollow reply. A man with a wooden keyed instrument takes his seat, laying 2 slim mallets across his knees like bamboo chopsticks resting between bites. Others arrive with quiet instruments, a bowed-spiked fiddle, a small flute, a pair of hand cymbals with edges wrapped in cloth so brightness will not surprise anyone. They nod to the gongs the way you nod to a host. The older man shows to younger players where the rattan knots sit against the beam and how to press them flat with the back of a thumbnail if the day grows humid. He points to the rice husk ash bowl and to the cloth for wiping hands. He says little and says it once. The boys nod. One adjusts the cord bead so it rests just against the knot, not before, not after. Small precautions make long days comfortable. A gentle side note, much instruction in such rooms lives in hands. A touch replaces a paragraph. A nod replaces a page. When the sun learns to angle, the bamboo blinds are lowered halfway, turning light into patient rectangles along the floor. The caretaker lifts an oil lamp to test its wick. It takes the flame in a small, round way and settles. He sets it aside for later. A gecko makes its short, unmistakable call, then stops as if embarrassed by its own enthusiasm. The first piece of the day is not a piece, really, but a greeting. The drum offers a simple pulse. The wooden keys answer with a brief pattern that sounds like footsteps remembering how to be guests. On the fourth breath, the low gong enters, as if it had been there all along. The note is not loud, it simply becomes a color in the room. The middle follows a few heartbeats later, placing a calm marker where the phrase turns. The small joins at a corner, a thin ribbon that helps the ear understand the shape. From the lane to traders pause with their baskets and stand just outside the steps. One leans a shoulder against the post and looks up into the rafters, as if the sound might be visible. A child in the back watches the older man's hand lift, hover, tap, lift. The hand never hurries toward the gong. It arrives as if the distance were already agreed upon. Between patterns, cups of tea make their way without clatter. The sugar is sliced with the edge of a spoon and kept to one side of the tongue sweetness that can be consulted when a phrase has to cross a small hill. The caretaker moves like a breeze with extra duties, wiping a post top here, smoothing a mat there. He lowers one blind another finger's width, the room size, into a softer light. A gentle side note, in some halls the large gong speaks, at the end of cycles, not at the beginning. It does not announce, it confirms. Its job is to remind everyone they have agreed to go on together. During the longer pieces, the older man rests his mallet on his thigh, head up, weight easy. He listens more than he plays. When his turn comes, he strikes once and lifts quickly so the tone can breathe its whole sentence. The drum maker, sensing the room's comfort, slips a cloth ring over one head to lower its voice a little. The wooden keys take the hint and fade just enough to let the bronze carry. At midday, rice and leaf packets appears. There are slices of cucumber and a dish of salt. Someone brings sticky rice cakes wrapped in banana leaf, a small luxury that knows how to be humble. Hands are washed with the lined scented cloth. The gongs are left alone for a quarter of an hour so air can reset. No one leans against the beam, no one taps a stray note. Rest is part of tuning. When playing resumes, the set expands and shrinks like a tide gently deciding. A bowed note lines the underside of a phrase. The small flute slips above the wooden keys for a few breaths, then retreats. The gongs continue their circuit, low to close the round, middle to invite the turn, small to brighten a step. The work is less music than keeping time together, spacious task that asks for attention, and rewards it by returning the room as a whole to itself. A gentle side note: people often speak of musicianship as creativity, but in many rooms, the art is steadiness, the craft of leaving space and filling it with trust. Late afternoon brings a group preparing for a procession. They request the deep voice to mark beginnings and ends while feet learn to agree. The older man nods. He shows them how to carry the mallet wrapped in cloth so it will not print on the boss if someone stumbles. He points to the spare rattan, the extra beads, the bowl of ash. They practice a few steps across the pavilion floor, then across the courtyard. The big gong's voice looms and softens, a friendly weather that walks with them at exactly the speed the feet decide. When they return, a short piece closes the room one last time. The drum's soft heart opens and closes. Wood and flute nod to one another. The middle gong gives the phrase its quiet hinge. The small adds the gleam you notice only when it is absent. The low voice ends the circle with a tone that leans and then stands, then simply is not there anymore. Silence does not rush in, it strolls. Evening turns the sky leaf blue beyond the blinds. The caretaker raises the lamp, its flame is kept small and satisfied. The older man oils each rim with a whisper of coconut and lime. He presses each knot flat once, and once again. He draws the cloth covers down and ties the corners with a square knot and a half-turn flat, simple, polite. The mallets hang by their cords, heads outward like flowers on a trellis. The ledger page receives one more line, voices placed, walls listening, care taught. The caretaker's pen makes a dot beside it, his private sign for enough. The boys lift the empty mallet bundle and the small bottle of oil. The older man looks up into the rafters, past the gecko, past the lamp's steady oval, and breathes in a way that says the day can be folded. He taps the big gong once with the softest possible stroke, only to tell the room thank you. The note is more felt than heard, like a hand resting on wood. Tomorrow, the pavilion will host other feet, other errands, other circles of time. The foundry yard will welcome new wax, new clay coats, and a furnace mouth that remembers how to be patient and bright. The three gongs will keep their places like calm stars that prefer local sky. And as those bronze voices settle into the long evening, we can walk by imagination to a colder shore. Under cedar rafters where alder smoke rises in thin blue streams and salmon turns from silver to soul. The orange quiet work that writes the season into food. We come to the smokehouse in the kindest hour, when the coast air is cool and the breath from the sea walks inland in a soft line. The building is low and steady, its roof of split cedar shingles wearing last night's dew like a necklace of clear beads. The door stands open to invite the morning. Inside, rafters climb to a dark ridge, and from those rafters, cedar poles hold rows of split salmon that have begun their glad change silver, that once took light like water now turning soft orange hue. Ray Smoke has spoken. The floor is packed earth and clean. Along the center runs a shallow hearth, not a fire that leaps, only a long bed of alder coals, banked and polite. Alder likes this work. It burns with sweetness and does not shout. A woman takes a thin stick and moves the embers as if tidying hair. The smoke that rises is blue and thin, the kind that writes quietly on the air and then becomes part of the room. Nets, and lines sleep on pegs by the door. A wooden dipper waits in a bowl of brine the color of tea made from snow. A gentle side note: here smoke is not for cooking quickly but for keeping. Low heat patient air, and sweet wood invite water to leave the fish without hurrying the flesh. Days will do what an hour cannot. Beside the hearth, a plank table carries tools that understand their century. A knife of ground stone with a cedar bark wrap that fits the hand, a knife of trade iron with a blade rubbed bright, a bone pen for teasing along spines, and a cedar wedge used like a quiet finger to hold open a fillet's hinged side. The table is salted with grains from yesterday, which are brushed away with a small bundle of rushes before work begins. A bowl carved from a single burl holds brine thickened with a handful of salt crystals and a whisper of sugar from sap. When the dipper lifts and returns, the surface barely ripples. The room keeps its calm. The salmon hang by pairs, laced with thin skewers of cedar so the halves stay open like book covers. A man checks the first row. He presses a fingertip to the surface, not to mark, only to listen for firmness. The fish is cool and likely tacky, which is exactly what the morning should be. He turns the pair a little on their rod so the line of smoke can meet a fresh face. Above him, the rafters take in the scent sea and alder and a sweetness that is not sugar but a kind of remembering. Outside, the beach keeps its arithmetic. The tide is falling, shells talk to one another under a thin wash of water, and a canoe rests high, its wet edge leaving a dark crescent on the sand. Children move driftwood farther up to dry for later. They do this with both hands and much seriousness, stopping to look at the smokehouse door as if listening to a lesson from the dim interior. A dog walks exactly where the night breeze traveled, and then lies down on his own shadow. Back inside, a girl sits near the doorway with a coil of spruce roots in her lap. She splits one with a small knife and rolls each half between her palms until it lies flat and ready. Spruce root cordage is good for many things here: sewing baskets tight to hold berries, lacing mats, and making short ties that help the salmon behave on the pole. She twists steadily, pinch and roll, the kind of work that loosens thinking but sharpens attention. A gentle side note: on this coast, cedar and spruce were not only trees but shelves and ropes and roofs and garments and boats. People and wood spoke one language, in many dialects. Near the far end of the hearth, an elder kneels on a mat and checks the coals with a stick the length of his forearm. He pinches one ember with wet fingers to quiet a spot that has grown proud. A small hiss agrees, and the line of smoke steadies. He opens the doorway wider with a prop so the draft will pull along the roof line and not nose upward through the fish. Air is a tool, too. It must be aimed. At the table, the woman lifts a new fish already cleaned and split from before dawn. That work happened outside, where rinsing is kind to floors and light is kind to eyes. Knives were quick, hands were sure, bones left quietly in a basket for the gull's later committee. Now she dips each half in the brine. The brine enters the room as a smell you could wear if you wanted to smell like patience. She lays the halves over a rod, cedar wedge at the hinge, and threads a skewer through to keep the book open. Salt crystals rest along the grain like small islands. A bent wood box sits against the wall, its corners made by coaxing a single plank around a curve rather than by cutting and joining. Inside are last week's pieces, firmer now, a little darker, edges glossy where oil has come benignly to the surface. When you brush them, They leave the smallest kiss of richness on your fingers. Those will be cut into sticks and laid in baskets with fresh leaves, then carried to a cool corner of the house or traded for other winter plants, dried berries, clamshell beads, warm words. A gentle side note, some houses kept rendered fish oil in bottles to sip when strength needed a quick hand. Others soaked finished strips in the oil, a second kind of keeping. Preservation wore many outfits. In a beam of slanted light, you can watch the smoke learn the fish. It starts as threads, then becomes a veil, then disappears as if invited into the salmon itself. Alder's voice is gentle and a little sweet. Maple, when used, adds a near honey. No resinous woods are welcomed. Their pitch would write the wrong story on the flesh. Today is all older, modest, and tender in the telling. The girl with the spruce roots stands to stretch her back and brings a coil of new ties to the table. She watches the woman's hands and then ties a short piece herself, copying the knot exactly, tucking the tail the way a river tucks itself around a stone. Her face is very calm. Learning is not a performance here. It is like breathing with a new thought added. From the roof line a small drip falls word to still hides under shingles. It lands with a sound almost too small to earn a word. The elder looks up and adjusts the prop at the door just the width of a fingertip. The draft changes from a whisper to a slightly different whisper. The fish notice, but they do not complain. Lunch happens near the threshold. It is not an event, only a continuation of being alive. Bannock warmed at the hearth on a flat stone, a strip of yesterday's fish torn and shared, a handful of berries that were hiding among last year's leaves until small hands found them. Tea from a blackened kettle tastes faintly of yesterday's fire and today's air. Someone laughs, but only in their throat. The smokehouse does not mind laughter, but it prefers the kind that keeps balance. A gentle side note, schedules here are tide and weather. Clocks can be wrong, the moon rarely is. Across the hours the room teaches how to see small changes. Surfaces dull and then brighten. Droplets first shy gather along the bottom edge of a fillet, then disappear as the air tells water it can begin its walk elsewhere. The belly pieces, fatty and eager, hold gloss, the back pieces, leaner, turn firm sooner. Hands travel along the rods and turn a pair here, lift a pair there, nudge a skewer so a corner will listen. The rhythm is slow but constant, a language with 6 verbs. Notice, turn, taste, just wait, trust. On the wall, a small slate carries marks a row for each day of this run, a tiny notch for each turning. The elder adds 1 notch with a pointed stick and blows the dust away. He is not counting to hurry, he is counting to remember. Outside, the sea draws back further, exposing rocks with barnacles the size of thumbnails. A gull steps, as if considering arithmetic, then forgets. A breeze from upriver brings the faint smell of green and freshwater stone. The smokehouse accepts this new guest and writes it into the room. Toward late afternoon, the strips nearest the hearth are tested again. A fingernail presses, the surface springs back without leaving a mark. Good. Another day for the thickest pieces, perhaps 2 for the most patient. No one is surprised. A mat is rolled out for the evening watch, and a pillow is made from a folded wool blanket rubbed with cedar tips. The coals are stirred into a long, even ton. The door is set to a night draft. The girl tidies the cordage, coiling what remains, and tucking the end under so It will not try to become a small animal. The man wipes the iron knife with a cloth barely damp with oil and lays it flat, edge turned inward out of courtesy. The bone pin returns to its peg. The brine bowl is covered with a cedar shingle and set cool near the floor. This is the first day of this batch, which is to say it is the first page of a story that will take 3 or 4 days to write, maybe 5 if Fogg decides to stay and visit. The smokehouse is a good room for such pages, simple, careful, and always reading the weather. Outside, the lane learns evening. Inside, Alder learns patience again. The salmon breathe in thin blue lines and give out the promise of winter comfort. Hands rest in their laps for a moment, and the room holds everything together with ease. Evening folds itself along the eaves. The line of coals is combed into a patient ribbon a little thicker in the center, thinner at the ends, the way writing leans on nouns and rests on commas. The door is propped to the night draught, neither wide nor narrow, just the width that lets the smoke travel its long, low path, and then slip out without arguing with the beams. The room settles into its second voice. The elder chooses a place near the middle of the hearth and lays a short, green alder branch over to gray coals. It breathes a faint sweetness and then behaves. A few cedar needles are sprinkled nearby, not for flavor but to show the path the air is taking. Their smoke rises in slanted threads, telling him where an ember might need a pinch. He nods and smooths the earth with the stick he uses as a quiet finger. A gentle side note: night work is mostly breathing and noticing. Brightness is discouraged, patience is fuel. Hanging fish turn deeper in color, from the fresh orange of morning to a quiet, lacquered tone that looks like stormlight walking through copper. Where oil has lifted to the surface, edges glisten softly. The man presses a fingertip to one strip and feels a faint tack. Good. Not finished, not soft, a kind of middle truth. He turns the pair a quarter turn on the rod so surfaces share the night's attention. At the doorway the girl prepares bundles for tomorrow's tethering. She cuts spruce root cords to equal lengths and coils each short rope into a tidy disc, tucking the tail so nothing tries to learn a new life. She rubs a little oil along her palms and smooths the coils, then sets them on a board in a row so her hands can find them without searching. Her work has the sound of reeds braided in a windless place. The woman returns from the house with a small bentwood box of last year's salt. She tips a careful pinch onto the back pieces that still look wet in stubborn places, then pauses to listen with her hand. If a grain melts instantly, she does not add more. If it clings, she brushes the rest away with 2 fingers. Salt here is gentleness, not command. A kettle sits on a flat stone at the hearth's far edge, hot without boiling. From it, she fills a shallow bowl and stirs in a spoon of brine reserved from the morning. With a cedar brush, she gives each new piece a single quick wash dip, lift, pass, then shakes the brush over the bowl and rests it on a peg. The bowl returns to the stone. The room keeps its steady temperature like a herb that refuses to grow too fast. A gentle side note: brining is a conversation more than a recipe. Weather speaks in it, wood speaks, the fish speaks, hands listen until they can answer without words. Outside, the tide reaches its lowest thought. Rocks shine, a crab writes a brief essay and then erases it. Someone's paddle knocks lightly on a canoe edge and then remembers to be quiet. The dog curls tighter and sighs. All of this lives at the smokehouse threshold like a frame that refuses to be heavy. Inside, the elder takes a small cedar shovel and coaxes ash to a thin blanket along one stretch of the hearth. Ash is a little like snow for fire. It slows without scolding. Where a coal looks too proud, he pinches it with wet fingers and returns it discouraged but not insulted. The line of smoke goes back to being a river of thin velvet. The girl picks up a knife and, with permission, cuts one narrow strip from a tail piece that has always been the good one for testing. She lays it on a small board and presses her thumb along the grain. It yields and returns. She tastes the tiniest corner, salt not loud, smoke not thick, oil a friendly echo. She nods to the elder. They do not change anything. A gentle side note, tasting is an honor and a responsibility. A good test is small and hidden. It does not advertise itself to the rest of the meal. The hour after dark is good for quiet tasks. Hooks are checked for burrs and touch with a stone where they ask. The cedar wedges used to hold fish open are rubbed smooth with sand and wiped with a bit of oil so they will not sip brine tomorrow. Baskets are inspected, spruce root stitches tight, rings firm, no broken splints pretending to be useful. The girl sets aside one small basket with a lifted lip. It will hold the first sticks when the time comes. In the beam of an oil lamp kept low, a shallow tray glints. It holds rendered fish oil from last season, clear and pale as amber tea. The woman warms a finger at the kettle and lifts a drop. Winter liked this oil in small sips, especially on mornings when paddles met cold water or when a cough asked for company. She sets the tray back, covered, with the easy respect given to something that has already proven itself. A gentle side note, jars of oil, bags of dried berries, strings of shell currency, bundles of fine cord stores were less pantry and more conversation with months ahead. Every item had a voice in the planning. The fish hang and learn, and the room learns with them. Now and then a faint crackle says a drop of oil found a coal and told a small story. The elder's stick answers, encouraging that story to be brief. The girl's coil of cords becomes a neat tower. The woman makes a note on the slate, 2 short scratches beside the day's line, one for the extra brush of brine, one for a draft change before moonrise. When it is time to rest, the night watch does not stop. It becomes thinner but still unbroken. The elder lies on his blanket near the door with his shoulder against the sill so any change in wind will top him awake. The girl sleeps for a while at the other end, her coil tower beside her like a small animal keeping guard. The woman rests with her head on a folded coat that smells faintly of cedar rind and smoke. Her hand stays open on the mat, palm up, as if still holding a tool in a dream. The room keeps company with ember sound. The roof ticks as dew gathers again. A small moth tries the light, and then decides differently. The lamp flame holds a low oval and does not flicker. Smoke continues its slow lesson in how to be thin and generous at the same time. Near midnight, the elder gets up and walks the length of the hearth without hurry. He adds a narrow stick of alder at the far end where the flow is weakest, then closes the door a finger width to remind the draft who tells the story. He turns the pears at the edge of the line and checks the belly pieces glossy and willing, but not there yet. The tails dry sooner. He touches to and nods. He sits again and drinks a mouthful of warm water, the kind that remains warm by courage alone. A gentle side note, Some houses sang in the night at low volume, not for entertainment, but for pacing. Here, the elder hums once a line with no words. The smoke seems to agree. Close to dawn, the girl wakes and takes his place as if trading a paddle across a canoe. She tiptoes along the rods, turning one pair every third peg to avoid teaching her hands a loop they cannot break. She opens the door the width of a berry so the sky's paleness can remind the coals what hour it is. Outside, first birds rehearse short ideas. Inside, Alder continues to draw lines you cannot see but can know by touch. The woman wakes and brings the kettle forward, adding a cup of river water to refresh it. Steam rises and folds into the older smoke, a wreath within a veil. She pours a bit into a carved cup and leaves it near the elder's blanket. He will find it without looking when he sits up. When dawn shows as a silver seam along the shingles, the night's page is complete. The fish now carry a sheen that does not wipe away and a firmness that answers lightly to the thumb. Today will be a turning day, perhaps also a cutting day near sunset for the thinnest pieces. The slate receives one more neat notch. The lamp is pinched. The draught is widened a breath. Outside, the tide considers returning. Inside, a quiet decision. Add a low basket of berries to the room, near the door where cool air says yes. They will dry a little in the smoke's company and become something pleasant to find in winter bowls. The day isn't new so much as continued. The smokehouse accepts this with satisfaction. The coals, once coned, will be coals again. The fish, once turned, will be turned again. The people, once fed, will be fed again. And the blue line of smoke, thin as a promise, resumes its patient writing. Morning widens, and the room stretches into its daytime stride. The coals are coned to an even, low glow that looks like a necklace of small suns sunk just under sand. The door is open to a measured width enough for a mild draught, not enough for a boastful breeze. Shadows of hanging fish fall on the floor in soft letters and move a finger's breadth as light turns. The woman begins with the first row nearest the door, the pieces that slept in cooler air. She turns each pair a quarter turn and checks a corner with a gentle pinch. The surface yields and returns, a sign of good progress. The elder walks to the hearth's far end and moves ash like quiet snow, blanketing to bright spots until their eagerness remembers manners. The girl brings a small basket of berries sale, glossy and dark, and sets it near the threshold where the air is cool. The basket will sit there all day and offer its water content to the room away both berries and smoke and joy. A gentle side note, fruit sometimes shared the smokehouse on its own schedule. The goal was not to smoke it deeply, only to dry it with company and a polite perfume. The first cutting happens early, not much, only tails, and the thinnest edges that have already learned firmness. The woman takes the trade iron knife and, with the bone pin as a guide, separates narrow sticks the width of a finger. She lays them on a clean cedar board, then returns them to the hanging rod with a second skewer. Air can reach all sides now. The room is pleased by geometry that helps. The girl counts softly as each small stick is hung 1, 2, 3, 4, then makes a notch on the slate to remember where the first sticks live. Outside, the beach develops while no one watches. A canoe is turned and leaned against driftwood so its belly can dry. 2 men lift a waterlogged log and roll it higher, laughing in a way that does not disturb the smokehouse's concentration. The dog finds a place just in the doorway shade and performs the serious project of sleeping with one ear awake. At the table, a bent wood box receives a thin coat of rendered oil to refresh its inside. The elder uses a cloth twist to spread the shine, then wipes the extra with a second cloth. The box will be 4 finished pieces, later layers separated by leaves so nothing persuades its neighbor to stick. Another box is checked for seams, its lacing of spruce root is tight and even, the knots flat like pressed shells. The girl brings the coil tar of ties she made last night and sets it beside the rods. She cuts several into pairs and helps thread them through slits in the fish so sticks will not lean. The knots she ties are flat and practical, tails tucked away from the path of heat. Her fingers remember exactly how much to pull, the cord answers without drama. When she finishes a roll, she smooths the air under it with her palm, a small habit that seems to keep the space honest. A gentle side note. Knots here are like grace notes, present, necessary, and designed never to draw attention to themselves. Midday asks for water, and a pause. Tea is poured from the blackened kettle, the cup's warm hands, and then cool lips. A loaf of bannock is set briefly near the hearth on a flat stone, then torn and shared with a strip of yesterday's fish. The girl closes her eyes at the first bite and says nothing, which is the most complete compliment she has. The dog opens one eye and pretends to be indifferent. After eating, tasks change shape. The elder brings into fresh armfuls of alder, splits them with 3 measured strokes each, and stacks them outside the door where wind can speak to them but not push them over. He chooses 2 pieces still green and lays them near the hearth to be used later, when their water will be welcome as con smoke. The woman rinses the cedar wedges, sands their edges with a fine grit, and rubs a breath of oil into them so tomorrow they will not take brine where brine is not required. The room's lesson continues. The middle rows look ready for more turning. Each pair is rotated. The thin wash of oil that has come to the surface spreads and then fades as if it had changed its mind. The smell is a kindly arithmetic, alder salt sea, and something like clean wool that has never seen soap. If you stand near the door and close your eyes, you can feel the smoke's direction on your eyelids as science the elder knows without naming. On a peg by the entrance hangs a narrow paddle carved for wafting. The girl uses it to test corners where smoke sometimes hesitates. She moves the paddle 2 or 3 times and watches threads lift and pass, then sets the paddle back in its place, tip up so memories drain toward the handle rather than into the grain. She touches the slate again, 1 mark for the completed turning, a second for the first sticks hung. A gentle side note, keeping tally here avoids the argument between memory and wish. Marks say what the hands did, not what the mind hoped to do. In the warmest hour, the door is opened a touch more and a damp cloth is hung along its inner edge to keep the draught humane. The berry basket is brought 2 steps inward so it will not suffer. A second small basket is set where the first had been, this one holding thin slices of clams on a reed mat. Another memory the room will write if there is space for multitasking. Visitors pass and pause. A woman trading shell beads for future fish peeks in and breathes deeply, then leaves a string of tiny white discs with a polite nod. A boy from a priv arrives with bundles of dry rushes and offers them for brush making. He is given a taste a corner of a stick cut from a tail and carries it like a secret on his tongue. Later, When the light angle's low enough to make rods look like lines on a page, cutting becomes generous. The tails are done now, and some side pieces are ready for sticks. The woman cuts carefully along the grain so fibers will respect their neighbors. The girl threads more skewers, 2 at a time, hands moving in a rhythm that feels like weaving. Finished sticks go nearer to the door where air is cooler. Thicker pieces stay near the hearth's center for another lesson. A gentle side note: placement inside the smokehouse is a map-pot center, patient ends, generous doorway. Knowing where to hang what is as much art as handling the knife. When the first tray of finished sticks last week's re-enters the room for dressing, the elder warms a spoon in hot water, dips it in the clear oil, and draws a faint line down each piece. It is not glazing, not really. It is a soft reminder to the tongue of summer rivers and winter rooms. The sticks are then wrapped with fresh leaves and placed in the oil bentwood box, layers separated like polite neighbors on a bench. Outside, the tide returns with its light shushing, bringing the voice of distant rocks underwater. A canoe is launched with 2 quiet pushes, and the paddle strokes look like writing that wants to be read only by the sea. The dog sits up, confirms that nothing requires his counsel, and lies down again. The elder checks the hearth's ends. He adds a short green alder billet at one side to keep smoke even through the evening and rakes a thin mantle of ash over a lively patch near the center. The coals answer by turning from orange to a comfortable red. The woman narrows the door a finger's width. The girl ties off the last stick of the afternoon and counts the row with the smallest upward lift at the corner of her mouth. Before dusk, tools return to their pegs. The iron knife is wiped and laid blade inward, the bone pin set where its shadow will be easy to find later. The cedar wedges stacked upright so edges will not learn to warp. The slate receives to last small marks and a curved line under today's work, a quiet underline that means steady and enough. The room feels taller in the late light. Hanging fish have deepened to a color like lacquer found in a river bend. The berry basket now offers a faint wrinkling on top. The clams have become lighter and more thoughtful. The air is a soft garment made of odor and patience. Evening will bring the long watch again, coals coned, door set, lamp trimmed, ears listening to the breath of the room. Tomorrow will invite the thicker pieces to become sticks. The first box may be tied closed with spruce root lacing and stowed in cool shade. Later in the week, some of these flavors may meet a neighbor's pot or travel upriver wrapped well and swapped for baskets or words. For now the smokehouse holds its comfortable middle, neither beginning nor end, only the reassuring weight of work that understands itself. Evening folds the sky into slower colors. Inside, the hearth is groomed to a single, steady ribbon, no sparks, only the calm red certainty of coals under a fine ash veil. The door is narrowed to its night width, the measure the elder keeps in his fingers rather than on a stick. Smoke runs like quiet water along the rafters, touches fish and beans in turn, and leaves without forgetting its manners. The girl lifts the first row near the threshold and tests with the press of a thumbnail. The surface springs back with a faint give and a promised firmness. She turns each pair 1/4, breathing out on every third piece without noticing she has invented a rhythm. The elder follows with the cedar paddle, wafting along corners that sometimes forget to participate. Threads of smoke rise straighter, then accept the path he suggests. A gentle side note: small gestures carry rooms. A door set 1 finger wider. A coal raked an inch to the left teaches to slight to brag about. All together they make winter's food. The woman prepares the cutting board near the door, where the light is honest. From the middle row she chooses the pieces ready to become sticks, belly first, then back, then the side that slept nearer the hearth. The iron blade learns again the length of her hand. She follows the grain so that fibers remain neighbors after parting. Each stick is no wider than a finger, no thicker than the spine of a leaf. She threads two skewers crosswise to let air pass between, and hangs them with the smallest nudge so they will remember to hang straight. The slate receives its marks, a single notch for the turn, one for the cutting, another to say first sticks were moved toward the door to finish patiently in cooler air. The girl keeps the tally as if it were sung softly, but true. A shallow tray of rendered oil returns from the warm corner, clear with a pale golden cast. The elder sets it near the hearth just long enough to wake the surface. He dips a spoon and draws a slender line on yesterday's sticks, the ones now ready for the box, then wipes the spoon with a clean leaf so no drop goes wandering. The sheen that remains is modest and right. He stacks the sticks between fresh leaves in the bentwood box, each layer pressed once a hand's light weight, to encourage the kit to behave as a group. A gentle side note: boxes are arguments settled beforehand. Leaves keep neighbors polite. The touch of oil teaches them not to cling. Cords remember the lid's promise. Outside, the tide converses with stones. A canoe returns and is slid into its high bit of driftwood. Paddles stand upright and send like narrow spines. Two silhouettes cross the beach with a coil of rope between them, not speaking, rope doing the talking in gentle loops. The dog opens both eyes, then closes one in case that is enough. Inside, the berry basket shows small changes. The top layer puckers a little, skins taut and modestly wrinkled. The girl lifts the corner of the mat beneath to loosen any jealousy from the weave, and turns the basket a quarter turn. The clam slices on their reed mat have become lighter in the hand. Those two are shifted cooler now, closer to the door so that tomorrow they will step out of the smokehouse and into a basket lined with. Each leaves for a brief visit to sun. The woman offers the elder a strip from the tail of a piece that has only just joined the sticks. He pinches, presses, tastes at the smallest edge. Salt quiet, smoke gentle, oil ready to be generous in winter. He nods, neither pleased nor displeased, simply aligned with the day. He returns the strip to the skewer and adjusts the draft the width of a fingernail. The flame in the small lamp by the wall steadies into a rounder oval. A gentle side note: lamps near smokehouses were kept low and simple. Light hue serves fingers, not spectacle. The long watch begins its softer pace. Tools are reminded where to sleep. The bone pin on its peg, blade wiped and laid edge inward. Cedar wedges rinsed and leaned upright to keep their spines true. The slate is rubbed lightly with a damp leaf where yesterday's dust dimmed a mark. The girl coils the last of her spruce root ties into a flat disc and tucks it beneath a smooth stone so the coil will stay around until morning says use. For a while, nobody moves. Smoke moves. Coals move without moving. The hanging fish move only by taking on a deeper lacquer, a color like wet cedar after rain. The elder lies down with one shoulder close to the sill so the draft's smallest change will touch the bone and say wake. The woman sits cross-legged and rubs a cedar spoon with oil until its bowl looks like the moon just before full. The girl closes her eyes and listens for tiny differences, the faint click when a drip of oil reaches a coal, the softest crackle when a thin stick remembers it has a corner. A gentle side note: learning a room is part hearing, part memory, part kindness. Children on the coast learn rooms the way others learn letters. A shift of wind arrives like a guest who knows which step creaks. It tastes of river and dew cold. The elder rises without hurry, opens the door another berry width, then lays a green alder twig along the far edge of the hearth. A few cedar needles, sprinkled to show the air, draw a diagonal line, then straighten. Good. He returns to the blanket and lies on his other shoulder to balance the night's education. Near midnight, a small ceremony. The first box is ready to close. Leaves are laid in the bottom, then a layer of sticks, then leaves again, until the box fills to a level that will not teach the lid bad manners. The elder lays 2 thin sprigs of cedar on top for fragrance that will stay private. The lid comes down. Spruce root lacing crosses the corners, flat knots pressed with thumbnails. He places the box near the door, where cooler air will finish flattening heat into calm. He does not stack another box atop it. Weight, like advice, is better when measured. A gentle side note: finished food likes air and space. Piled too much, even good work learns to argue. The girl rises for her turn at the watch. She stirs the coals as if brushing hair light. Even strokes, then sits with her back against the wall and counts breaths by 2s until the room's rhythm replaces numbers. The dog's tail thumps twice in sleep. The lamp flame shrinks and then remembers itself. She turns to pears at the hearth's far end, moves the berry basket a hand's width, writes a neat tick on the slate, then lets her hands rest, palms open to the warm air like shells. Pre-dawn is the smokehouse's favorite hour. The roof ticks a language of cooling and dew. The hanging fish reflect the lamplight back as 1,000 small, patient suns. The elder wakes and takes the girl's place. He closes the door a seed's width when the draft grows briefly bold, then returns the opening to where the night began. He tastes one sliver, closes his eyes, and recognizes the exact same story as an hour ago, only told deeper. Outside, the beach loses its edges and then finds them again in a new gray. A heron moves 1 step and waits a long time, well within the doctrine of this room. The dog stands, shakes once, considers a different part of the floor, and chooses the same one. As the sky decides to be morning, the tasks prepare to change clothes. The coals are combed into a neater ribbon. The kettle is refreshed with river water and set back on its stone. The woman pinches the lamp's wick and cleans its lip with a twist of damp cloth, leaving a shine the lamp seems to enjoy. The girl opens the door to day width and rolls her shoulders in a way that says the night was neither hard nor easy, only correct. Before work resumes, they mark the slate with a long curved line under the night's careful ticks, a sign they all use that reads, "Watched and good." The elder smooths the line with a fingertip. The woman checks the box laces and hums a note that could be agreement. The girl brings in new alder billets and sets them by the hearth like polite guests waiting their turn. A gentle side note: marks, hums, and small arrangements are not decoration. They are the vocabulary of trust between hands and winter. Now the day can begin again, turning, cutting, brushing, hanging, listening. Some pieces will come down near sunset to be wrapped. Berries will be stirred. Clam slices will leave for air and return for a final brief hello. A visitor may trade a string of shell for a bundle. Someone else may leave a story and take a taste. The smokehouse will keep its even weather and write one more page in a book that has only ever had one chapter. Patience. Outside, light arrives in a thin sheet over water. Inside, the blue line of smoke thins to its day voice. The first row turns at the girl's careful hands, the elder smooths Ashwarash wants to think, and the woman ties the box with an extra knot that turns flat and stays put. The room feels taller again. That is how you know the night did its work. Morning loosens itself from the shingles and slips into the doorway as a silver ribbon. The door stands at day width. The draft remembers its lines without being told. The hearth has been combed to a quiet necklace again, coals under a film of ash that looks like frost where winter will never come inside. A small cup of water cools near the threshold for wetting fingers when a coal grows opinionate. The room is ready, and so are the hands. The woman begins with the rose that slept farthest from the hearth. She pinches and presses, then nods once, firm. The surface answers the thumb and keeps its shape, a sign the inside has learned the same lesson. She turns the pear a quarter and moves on. The elder follows and moves the cedar paddle once, twice, a whisper of air to persuade a stubborn corner. The girl carries in new alder billets, splits each with 3 measured strokes, and stacks them where they will watch the day before joining it. A gentle side note, wood waits well when it can see the work it will become. People, too. Today will be a day for taking down and putting away. The first box full of last night stands near the door, tied with spruce root lacing that lies flat and calm. 2 more wait open, their insides brushed with a breath of oil that looks like a thought rather than a shine. Cedar leaves, fresh and cool from shade, rest in a basket to separate layers kindly. A coil of cord sits ready for tying the dog on general principle, guards it by sleeping near. The woman lifts the first finished sticks from the cooler end, where air taught them patience through the night. She lays them on a clean cedar board and draws a warm spoon with a film of clear oil down each piece, just a line, not a coat. The sheen rises and then tucks itself in. She layers sticks and leaves in the bentwood box leaves, fish leaves, pressing each layer once with her palm so the neighbors greet but do not crowd. A cedar sprig, barely bruised, goes on top before the lid meets the rim. The elder ties the lacing with a square knot, and then a turn that lies flat. He presses it with his thumb until it remembers. The box sits a moment longer in door cool to settle its breath. The slate on the wall receives a long mark, and 2 short ones, one for the rows turned, one for the first box closed, and the last for a small change in draft after suntip. The girl writes them with the quiet satisfaction of someone who knows a tally is a promise you can keep with your hands. Outside, the tide turns toward fullness, bringing a low, good sound to the stones. The canoe that dried on driftwood yesterday is lowered and stands on its own shadow. A heron, with knees like careful hinges, takes 1 step and makes it last a paragraph. The dog opens one eye to check on the idea of visitors, then resumes guarding the coil by not moving at all. At the board, the woman cuts the thicker pieces that slept near the hearth's center-side strips that learned firmness slowly. The trade iron blade travels the grain, a deliberate river. She threads 2 skewers through each new stick, and hangs them near the door to finish their thinking in cooler air. The girl ties a short spruce root strap at each end of the rod so it will not learn to lean, not sit flat like polite shells. When a row is complete, the elder touches the rod once to set it true. The whole line answers by dropping a breath lower, a small choir agreeing on a pitch. A gentle side note: when work talks back, even quietly, it is not arguing, it is confirming. Rooms like this ask and answer all day in tiny, honest words. A neighbor arrives at the doorway with a coil of fine cord and a pouch of shell beads. She breathes in, smiles, and holds up a basket lined with leaves. Trade, the elder lifts one finished box and sets it between them. They do not open it, trust is a good lid. A length of cord changes hands, as does a string of white discs soft as river light. The neighbor leaves with a nod, and the box leaves a warm rectangle on the floor where it stood in an absence that feels like a full shelf somewhere else. The buried basket near the door now shows a subtle wrinkling. The girl stirs the top layer with 2 fingers, then turns the whole basket a quarter turn to share air fairly. The clam slices, already light from their overnight stay, are shaken gently on their reed mat and carried out to meet a square of sun on the porch, then dropped back in after a quiet count to keep them from learning pride. They will spend one more evening in the cooler end of the room, no more, no less. Midday invites water and small food. Bannock warmed on a flat stone, yesterday's salmon tack cut into thin slivers, a berry rolled in the pond to shine and then made to vanish. The kettle gives tea that tastes faintly of last night's smoke and this morning's patience. No one uses many words. The room is already speaking. The dog receives the corner of bannock that inexplicably always falls, then acts surprised and grateful in equal measures. After eating, the elder brings in fresh alder and sets one green stick near the far end of the hearth for later, when its small gift of moisture will keep smoke honest. He rakes a film of ash over a bright patch. The glow quiets to a clean red. The woman takes down the first of the cooler sticks, the ones that finished before noon, and, with a long cedar needle, pierces a neat hole near an end of each. A thin cord will pass through pairs. The bundle will hang in the house's cool corner where winter stories will find it by smell. A gentle side note: houses wore their food like jewelry, strings of dried fish, braids of roots, rings of clams, all placed where air could pass and hands could reach without thinking. The girl wipes the iron knife with a cloth dampened from the kettle and rubs a trace of oil along the blade so it will remember not to rust. She sets the knife with the edge turned inward out of respect, the bone pin above it like a small, useful moon. Cedar wedges are dipped in warm water, rubbed smooth with sand, and set on a peg where their spines will stay straight. The spruce root coil gives up its last ties and lies flat, job content. Visitors drift in and out of the doorway like tide that does not track moons. A man with a paddle wrapped in bark stops to listen with his nose, which is the correct way to listen here. A pair of children appear with 5 berries between them and leave with 2 slices of clam they have already promised not to let wander. A woman in cedar bark skirt offers a story from upriver in trade for a corner taste. The elder accepts the story and keeps it. The taste goes to the woman's hand and then to her eyes, which close briefly in thanks. By late afternoon the room is ready for its last patient rearrangement. The sticks that moved to the door at noon are ready to come down. The woman threads them in pairs with a thin cord, ties a flat knot, and hangs the loops on a rod carried to the main house by the girl, who walks carefully because being careful is not heavy. The elder closes the box he just finished filling. The lid fits with a sound the ear likes more than it realizes. Lacing crosses corners, and the knot lies like a thumbprint. The box joins its sibling in door cool for a few breaths, then goes to the shade of a corner that knows where winter lives. The slate receives its final marks of the day, a neat stack for small ticks, and under them, the long curved line they use to say enough and good. The girl, with a seriousness that does not preclude happiness, draws the line with the stick's smooth end. The woman wipes the board's lower edge with a damp leaf so tomorrow's marks will not trip over today's. Evening leans in with its easy shoulder. The coals are coned one last time into a line that will think slowly until night watch begins. The door is eased toward nightwit, but not there yet. The lamp is trimmed and cleaned, earning its small, round flame. The dog stands, circles the absence of trouble, and lies down facing the coral that once needed guarding, and now is only a circle with good posture. A gentle side note, endings in this room are not much different from beginnings. The same motions, the same senses, only deeper. Before the covers come down over the door, the woman lifts one finished stick from a bundle and breaks off a small taste. She presses it into the elder's palm. He chews like someone reading slowly and smiles with his eyes. The girl is offered a sliver and holds it on her tongue without biting, as if learning a word by shape rather than sound. They do not say anything, which is the correct way to agree. Tools return to their pegs, bone pin, blade, cedar wedge. The spoon that oiled sticks is washed and rubbed with a leaf until the bowl looks like a moon again. The bentwood boxes, tide and content, rest where cool air meets wall. The buried basket is stirred once, the clam slices given a last brief hello to the doorway air, and the slate lean to dry. Outside, the tide folds its lip over stones and pulls back with a sound like sleep beginning. Inside, the smokehouse takes a small, private breath and keeps it. Tonight a shorter watch will do. Tomorrow will bring the last of this run to the boxes, and the house will carry on as a winter cupboard that smells of older and agreement. Now the smoke thins and the day folds. The door's prop finds its night notch. The lamp is pinched to an ember and then to nothing. Hands rest. Food hangs, waits, and is already company for a season not yet here. And as cedar rafters keep their soft vows, and the last blue thread of smoke leaves for the night, we can walk in our minds to a very different workshop, an endless straight hall smelling of hemp and war and tar, where lamps hang like small moons and footsteps stretch fiber into rope. One patient yard at a time. We enter a building so long that night seems to take to breaths to cross it. Lamps hang at intervals, each a small, steady moon cupped in tin, and between them the floorboards stretch away in a calm, patient sentence. This is the rope walk of the dockyard, straight as a promise, wide enough for footsteps to think, quiet enough that tar can speak in its soft pine voice without being interrupted. Outside, masts are taller darknesses. Inside, hemp waits to become weather's companion. At the near end, the low stove keeps a pot of Stockholm tar, the temperature of warm bread. The tar looks black until the lamp's oval touches it, and then it shows brown and honey at the same time. A ladle rests nearby, its lip curved for kindness. Along the wall lie bundles of hemp stricks, bound with twine, their ends coned to a soft fringe by the day's hatchels. They smell of dry fields and long travel by ship. A hand placed on them comes away faintly dusty, like a hand that has patted a well-behaved dog. A gentle side note. Naval rope in this age began as hemp grown far from the sea, dried and bundled, then bought in bales that remembered river ports in their labels. A long life in salt water began with stalks that had listened to wind. The first work of night is combing thought into order. A journeyman stands at the hackling bench, its iron teeth set in tidy ranks. He draws hemp through the hatchel in even strokes forward, lift, return, catching the long fibers, and asking the short to wait for smaller cords later. The fibers that agree to be companions become a loose ribbon called a tow. He weighs a handful in his palm, listening with his hand to how thick a yarn it wants to become. A second man, sleeves rolled, rubs a bit of tallow on his fingers so stray hairs will obey. At the far end, a framed row of turning hooks waits, driven by a line shaft that hums like a distant cat when it wakes. The four-turner checks each hook's pin for freedom, then lowers the safety bar that keeps enthusiasm in its place. Between hook and hackle bench, the long floor holds a chalk line down its middle and small marks at right angles, yards counted out in tidy white intervals. A bell hangs by a string at the 50-yard point, not for alarm, only to mark a length when the rope's mind is elsewhere. The foreman appears with a small tin of chalk and a wooden top, shaped like a stout cone with grooves. He raps the top lightly against his palm. The tar on its wood gives back a clean, resinous breath. He looks down the length of the hall, not to see the end because no one ever sees the end from here, but to become friends with distance again. The twist begins in small, trustworthy things. A spinner takes the tow in his left hand and feeds it with his right to a flying hook at the near end, just a single yarn at first. The hook turns, the fibers listen, and the loose ribbon tightens into a cord that lies obediently between finger and thumb. He keeps the feed even by moving his hand in a quiet circle, a motion learned long ago by watching someone who didn't know he was being watched. When the yarn lives, it is walked forward and laid on a peg at the foreman's mark. 3 more yarns follow, then 6, each taught to carry without sulking, their twist matching like threads that will later agree to be neighbors. A gentle side note. Rope is made of agreements, yarns twisted one way, strands laid the other, final rope balanced so it neither kinks with pride nor loosens with laziness. Opposites are how it stays in one piece. When a small family of yarns has gathered, they are brought together to become a strand. The foreman lifts the wooden top and settles it among them. The grooves keep each yarn in its lane. The four-turner sets the hook frame, turning a little faster now, and the journeyman walks backward, paying out the yarns through the top. His hands ride the wood lightly, guiding without scolding. As twist travels, the separate cords lean into one another and become a single, thicker strand that hums under the palm. He stops sometimes to smooth a lump, adding a wisp of tow where a thin place pretends to be modest. A brush of warm tar, lifted from the pot with a narrow mop, passes along the strand. The fibers take it like a promise against weather. Near the wall, the serving bench keeps its own neat company, a mallet with a heart-shaped head wrapped in cord. A spool with parceling thin tarred canvas strips that will later lie along a rope like a quiet undercoat. A ball of marline, fine and sticky, used to sew weather into the surface. For now they wait, boxed politely by shadows, knowing their turn is after the rope has learned its first shape. tea sits in a blue tin mug on a bench by a coil of finished line the color of quiet toast. The mug keeps its heat by proximity to tar and by a belief that it should. Now and then a hand finds it, drinks without ceremony, sets it down exactly where it was, handle facing left, a habit that lets a hand find it in the dark. A gentle side note: long hauls warn their people. A mug left in the wrong place becomes a stranger and is set right again by someone who didn't know he noticed. The first strand reaches the bell and clicks it with a small, satisfied touch. No one jumps. The foreman marks the strand's end with chalk, then loops it on a peg. 2 more strands are made, twins in size, and twist by feel rather than ruler. Lantern light makes slow rivers along their tarred surfaces. When 3 have cooled enough to behave, the laying begins, the part where rope becomes rope. The hook frame at the far end is slowed. The near-end cradle with its 3 receiving hooks is set a little higher than knee height. Each strand is looped over its hook, their heads dressed in a tarred yarn whipping that keeps ends neat. The foreman lifts the top again, this time with a broader groove set, and places it between the strands. Steady, he says, which here means nothing more than we do what we always do. The four-turner starts the far hooks turning. The near cradle is allowed to answer. The strands twist opposite to their berth, and that contrary motion persuades them to lean together and sleep in each other's arms. The top slides back under the foreman's hands, traveling the hall at walking pace. Behind it, a new rope appears where strands had only recently been 3 opinions. Hemp speaks when it is content, a small, even whisper, not unlike a cat thinking about being pleased. The men listen while their feet remember distance. Their souls find the places where boards rise a finger's width and step slightly left to let the rope skin. The bell at 50 yards will click again, the chalk marks will pass, the lamps will show their ovals and then show them again. Work here is not measured by surprise. At the halfway mark, the foreman stops the train, tucks a wisp of tow into a shy hollow, and smooths it with a thumb that knows exactly how much pressure will make a memory. He brings the tar mop along the newborn rope once more, long, even strokes, a barber's kindness. The smell rises, clean and deep, the kind that makes people think of ship ribs they had never seen. A small scrap of parceling is pressed over a neck where a splinter once had an opinion. It lies down flat. The top moves again. So does the night. The farther end of the hall breathes back at them, not louder, simply nearer. Outside, an unseen chain clinks once in the harbor, and then decides it has said enough. Inside, the rope grows by foot and breath, a straight brown wether that will later circle a mast and call it home. We will go with them a little farther, past the bell, past the chalked yards, to where hands tie off what they have asked fibers to become. But not yet. Night likes to keep its pace, and this hall is good at granting such requests. The new rope continues to appear behind the moving top like a path deciding to be visible. The four-turner keeps the distant hooks turning with the restraint of a clock that prefers to be 5 minutes early. The foreman's hands ride the top, not gripping, only guiding, palms dark with tar that will be washed later with sand, not soap. The strands lean into each other at the right persuasion, neither sulking nor crowding. Between lamp pools, the surface looks brown. Inside a lamp's oval, the tar shows a warm amber that remembers trees. At the chalked mark of 50 yards, the little bell accepts its tap and answers, with a sound as modest as a spoon against a cup. The foreman stops the train for a breath. He pinches the rope at arm's reach and feels for hum. It drums back in a small note that says the twist is living in even rooms along the length. He tucks a whisper of hemp into a light place, smooths with a thumb, and motions on. The top resumes its slow walk. The rope surface sips the tar laid earlier, then keeps moving. A gentle side note: rope remembers fingers. Too rough, and it holds grudges. Too soft, and it becomes dreamy. The best touch convinces without explaining. Halfway down the hall, a boy waits with a coil of spun yarn and a small tin of chalk. He watches the foreman's nod and steps forward. His task is to follow on to offer a new yarn to the hook when an old one thins, so the strand never learns interruption. He holds the live end, breathes, and lets the new yarn marry the old with a small overlap the twist will swallow. His hands leave a chalk kiss where the join hides, not for show, only so someone who knows where to look will say, "Ah, you chose well." The far hooks slow at a signal. The foreman rests the top and lays the rope in a cradle made of slotted wood so it will not learn to wander while he inspects. He wipes tar from his fingers on a scrap of canvas that already looks like map and history both. He lifts the rope so a lamp can see better and checks three things: the lay's angle, the evenness of the surface, and whether the heart those inner yarns feels neither ambitious nor lazy underthumb. All three answers are yes. He nods the kind of nod that lets everyone continue being themselves. Now the strand heads the thickened, wet parts at the rope's beginning reach the near cradle. The foreman lowers the safety bar, and the train rests. It is time to stop her off and let the new length collect its breath. A stopper is nothing more than spun yarn wrapped cleverly around rope and hooked to hold while other hands finish their thought. The journeyman applies to stoppers with a rhythm learned from someone long gone: 5 tight turns, a frapping turn pulled down like a belt, then a square knot that lies flat and minds its business. The rope thanks him by staying where he is. Tea arrives the way tea always does, in a blue tin mug that finds its place by the tar pot for warmth. A sip makes the world narrower and kinder. The four-turner rolls the hooks with a brush so small it looks like a toy, 1 drop for each bearing, each drop finding its home without feeling lonely. The boy brings a shallow box of nap-shore hemp teased from the second hatchel to fill places where serving will prefer a smoother bed. A gentle side note: there is a proverb among riggers: worm and parcel with the lay, serve against the lay. It is not poetry, it is weatherproofing condensed. They begin the finishing that makes rope into rigging. First comes worming. Thin lengths of spun yarn are tucked into the valleys between the rope strands, running with the lay, so the surface becomes more level. The boy feeds the worm from his coil. The journeyman presses it home with a bone fid that slides without scratching. Over this goes parceling, strips of tarred canvas wrapped with the lay, each turn overlapping the last like roof shingles. The canvas smells of old pine and fast weather. The rope beneath looks comforted. Last comes serving. The serving mallet, wooden, heart-shaped, its groove rubbed with tar, cradles the rope. Marline feeds from a spool and races her on, fast, tight, smooth, binding the parceling in bands of tarred thread that look like careful writing. One man turns the rope slowly in the cradle, the other draws the mallet along, shoulders easy, wrists sure. Against the lay, the lines bite and settle. The mallet thumps a friendly syllable with each inch and makes a sound the hall knows by name. The foreman checks the serving's tightness, By tapping a knuckle along the wrap, the note must be even. It is. He smooths a touch of tar with the narrow mop, a barber's finishing pass, and ties off the marline with a reef knot he presses flat with his thumbnail. The served length gleams softly, a skin against brine and sun. A gentle side note, tar keeps out water and invites in memory. Ropes dressed today will smell like tonight for years, even when the ship forgets where the dockyard sat. The train starts again. They lay another length yards that become fathoms in the ledger, 6 feet per mark, the chalk answering for distance in tidy, white senses. The bell, polite as ever, speaks at its station. Hooks hung, soles whisper, the top slides. The boy replaces a dwindling coil with a fuller one, and chalks the join. The foreman touches the rope now and then the way a reader touches a page to move the eye. When sufficient length has gathered, they crown and whip the end. A back splice would be proud and permanent. Today they want a neat end that welcomes splicing at sea. The journeyman gathers the strands, bends them like a bouquet, and binds them with tarred twine in a whipping that lies flat and refuses to argue. He snugs it with a riding turn, cuts the tail clean, and melts the cut with a tar-worn thumb. The rope, dignified and uncomplaining, looks finished but not final. Now comes the coil, a calm ceremony. The foreman leads the first bite into a large, low coil on the floor, turns each loop so it lies with its natural twist, and avoids the small arrogance of kinks. The boy lays a canvas pad beneath the coil to keep tar from learning more of the boards than is useful. Loop by loop, the rope becomes a sleeping spiral, warm to the hand, heavy without threat. A canvas strap and a wooden toggle complete the bundle. The toggle slides home with a soft, satisfying the sound of a plant agreeing to be a thing. A gentle side note, coils have tempers. Lay them with the rope's chosen turn, and they will behave for miles. Cross them once, and they will remember at the worst time. They mark the coil with chalk, diameter, length, purpose a hawser for mooring, not a stays standing line. The foreman opens the ledger and writes in a neat hand by lamplight. Gate, length in fathoms, fiber, tar batch, men present. Beside the numbers he draws a tiny cone for the top, and 3 lines for strands of picture worth words to anyone who has stood where he stands. Between jobs, the Ropewalk tends itself. The tar pot's skin is lifted and folded back like a thin blanket. The hackles are brushed with an old toothbrush that refuses to retire. The line shaft's belt is shifted 1 pulley inboard to ease its breath. A lamp wick is trimmed with a small shears that looks like a bird. The floor receives a light sweep to collect drop toe. The short fibers are not waste, they will become oakum for caulking, another craft's necessary quiet. Outside, the harbor turns in sleep, chains remembering to be still. Inside, a new set of stricks is opened. The cut twine falls away like a ribbon that has concluded. The boy brings his broom of split bamboo and clears the chalk line with a single pass so the next length will read true. Someone's blue mug returns to its ledge, handle to the left. Someone else, without looking, sets it a finger's width farther from the edge because hands remember the night a sleeve once suggested otherwise. They begin again not because of hurry, but because hauls like this prefer momentum to idleness. Toe meets hook, hook teases twist, yarns meet neighbors, strands find contrary agreement. The top listens to both and tells them to be rope. Tar follows like kind weather. Voices stay low. Boots choose the left of the rise in the 9th bay, the right of the thinner board in the 12th. The bell remains gentle. The foreman pauses once more at the chalked mark and listens with his thumb. He smiles without showing it. Work is going well in the way only people who do it notice. He looks to the far door, a small square of deeper dark, and imagines, not ships exactly, but decks under sun, blocks turning without complaint, and lines paying out in good temper. He leans the top 2 fingers to the left, a whisper of guidance. The strands obey because they were asked rather than told. By the time the second coil grows round and mild, the lamps have inched along their wicks. The stove obliges with one more patient pot of tar. The ledger receives its commentaries. The hall keeps its straightness. Outside, masts think thoughtful thoughts. There will be splicing before dawn, a short tie in one coil for a mooring, a long eye in another for a capstan, the fid and marline spike ready to show their quiet tricks. But for now the laying speaks, and the top walks, and the rope becomes exactly what it was always saying it wanted to be, only louder. Splicing begins in a quiet corner of the hall where the lamps hang lower. A canvas cloth is spread to keep tar from speaking to the floorboards more than necessary. The coil is brought near and turned so its natural twist lies friendly. The journeyman lifts the fit, a smooth, tapered tool of boxwood, warm to the hand, and the marline spike iron neat, persuasive. He feels the rope, turns it until the lay shows a small valley, then slides the fid beneath as a finger that never bruises. A gentle side note, a good ice splice is a handshake between rope and itself. It is made of turns that remember, it is held not by force, but by the habit of friction placed where it wants to live. For a short tie intended for mooring, he measures the eye against a wooden gauge wide enough to sit easily over a bollard, narrow enough to keep dignity. He unlays 3 strands back a short distance, keeps them from forgetting their form by whipping their ends with quick wraps of twine, then bends the rope to make the oval. One by one, using the fid as a road and the spike as a suggestion, he tucks the strands under and over their neighbors, following the old law, over one, under one, in sequence. Each time stepping backward a little so the work lies smooth. After 3 full rounds, the eye learns its new shape. After 5, it promises to keep it. He rolls the splice under his palm, a gentle pressing that teaches bulges to relax and finishes with a seizing at the throat. Tarred marline winds in tight, level bands, then is cinched with a frapping turn that pulls the whole into one thought. He knots off with a reef knot pressed flat. The eye sits on the canvas like a tidy ear. The foreman nods and chalks a small mark near the throat, the shop's way of saying, "We made you." At the next bench a long eye begins for a capstan, taller and more oval. Its length measured against a wooden pin painted with 2 black rings. The work is the same but stretched, strands laid farther, tucks placed with more patience. The throat seized with a few extra turns because capstans repeat a lesson all day and appreciate reinforcement. A dab of warm tar, smoothed by thumb, darkens the seizing to the correct quiet. On a trestle nearby sits oakum, honest and plain short hemp teased apart, salted with tar, gathered into a hump that looks like a small sleeping animal. Between jobs a boy kneads it with both hands, turning, pressing, turning, until the fibers feel like agreement. He will carry bundles of it tomorrow to the caulkers along the slips, where it will be driven into plank seams with a blunt iron and a wooden mallet. Then paid with hot pits, the ship's version of keeping weather on the outside. For now, The oakum waits and breathes pine. A gentle side note. Crafts in the yard overlapped like voices in a round. Rope, caulking blocks, sails each sang a plain melody, together making a steady song. Far down the hall, the frame of hooks rests while the line shaft hums to itself at a slower pace. The four-turner oils the pulleys a second time, one drop each, the kind of kindness machines understand. He rubs the leather belt with a heel of tallow to soften its manners, and shifts it a notch to keep the run even. The lamps are trimmed with shears shaped like a bird, wicks become neat, domed tops. Soot is wiped from chimneys with a cloth, leaving little clean circles in the glass where light feels welcome. A tray of bread and cheese appears from somewhere sensible. The slices are stout, the cheese smelling faintly of cellar and salt. A cut of apple, saved from afternoon, adds a small, bright thought. Mugs find hands without talk. The foreman, with a bit of chalk, refreshes the center line on the floor, pulling the string taut and letting it snap to leave a long, straight whisper of white. The hall seems to breathe easier when the mark is fresh. Humidity is tested the old way. The journeyman hangs a small length of yarn by a nail and watches the curl. In damp air it softens its spiral, in dry it tightens. Tonight it hangs modestly, good for serving and for splices that want to bed down without becoming brittle. He mentions this to no one and to everyone at once by turning the tar kettle a half-inch away from the stove so it will think a little slower. A gentle side note. Measuring instruments were often cheap, quick, and right. A bit of yarn could be a hygrometer. A thumb could be a scale. Proof follows making. Near the far doors stands a proving bench posts with rollers and a weighted lever that asks rope to meet a reasonable future. The new hawser is led through the ice set over a polished hook, the standing part turned twice around a drum. The lever descends with dignified speed, the rope tightens and hums. The foreman watches the lay. If it opens too fondly, more twist is wanted. If it snarls, less. Tonight the rope holds its angle like handwriting with steady slant. A small creak speaks from a rower and is answered by a drop of oil. The lever rises. The rope relaxes, but does not forget. That is the lesson. They mark the end with a wax stamp and impression of a tiny top, and 3 lines set into warm tar so it prints cleanly. In the ledger the foreman writes proved good temper in a hand that wastes nothing. At the serving bench, parceling goes on for a length meant to meet weather first around the eye and a little beyond. Strips of tarred canvas spiral neatly with the lay. Over them, marline spins from the serving mallet fast and snug. The hall listens to the quick, even tapping as the mallet walks. The boy feeds the marline couts without speaking and puts a tiny chalk dot where each fresh coil begins. The foreman, passing, flicks a dot with his thumbnail to blur into the wrap. Marks are for making, not for display. A cat, pale and honest, enters from the far doors and travels along the wall at the pace of thought. It pauses at the tar pot, approves the warmth, and establishes headquarters on a folded sack. The boy smiles with his eyes. The cat blinks back as if to say that order has increased by 1. A gentle side note. Night crews collect small guardian scats, lucky nails, a particular mop. None of it changes physics, all of it tempers mood. A dust probes the big doors and is answered by the iron latch. A draft follows down the hall, testing lamp tongues. The wick steady. The tar breathes deeper and then remembers itself. The foreman walks the line once more, pressing an errant whisker of hemp back into the serving, trimming a frayed parceling edge, setting the top on a shelf with its point inward. The boy sweeps the chalk line's edges so it remains a line rather than a lane. Now another length is laid, shorter this time lead line size, meant to be light in the hand that measures depth. Yarns are fewer, the twist a touch tighter, the serving thinner. When finished, the foreman ties a small Matthew Walker knot at its end, a stopper knot that looks like a modest crown. He smiles slightly at the knot's tidy shoulders and writes 4 soundings in the margin of the page. Between tasks they make cordage for whippings. To strands, fine twist, tar given with a finger. The journeyman rubs it between his palms until it firms. He hands a length to the boy, who winds it around a spare stick to keep from tangling. Everything in the hall seems to enjoy being stored carefully. A gentle side note, discipline here is not severity. It is relief of not having to search, of not having to correct what a minute of neatness prevents. The near door opens briefly for a messenger from the sail loft. He carries a small roll of canvas and a list with 3 lines. Bolt ropes wanted, length, deadline gentle. The foreman nods, places the roll by the wall, and writes a note under tomorrow's column. His pencil's point is flat and loyal. The messenger leaves the way he came, soft tread, a draft, the sense of upstairs work that smells of chalk and flax waiting its own turn. Toward the middle of the night, lamps are trimmed again, wicks are cut to roundness, chimneys wiped, lifted, and replaced. The stove feeds the tar with enough heat to keep it pourable but not proud. Someone tests viscosity the cheap way, lifting the ladle and watching the thread fall. When the thread slows a fraction, the ladle returns to its rest. Enough. The second coil sleeps under its canvas strap. The first rests upright against a post so the eye does not learn laziness. The proving bench is tiddied. The lever raises itself with a soft, dignified sigh as the counterweight wins its argument. Tidy tools, fit wiped, spike laid with point inward, mallet leaned groove down so dust will avoid it. Brushes hung from pegs bristle down to stay themselves. The foreman writes a last neat line before beginning the next lay. Night calm, tar to fingers from brim, yarn curl modest, work agreeable. He looks down the hall to the small square of farther dark, and thinks of morning. Carts, voices, gulls, a clerk's cap, a crane that will yawn. For now the Ropewalk holds only quiet decisions. They start the hooks again. Yarns climb into strands. Strands accept the contrary lay and become rope. The top listens and travels. The bell mindfully makes its teaspoon sound on time. Boots choose their familiar places on the boards. The cat dreams of being entirely awake. The tar smells like pine that has remembered the sea. Work continues not as a race, but as a lullaby for fiber. Another length will be ready before dawn. Another splice will sit on the canvas like a well-meant answer. And the hall, straight as comfort, will have one more reason to keep being itself. Toward the small hours the hall grows even steadier, as if time itself has decided to walk heel to toe along the center chalk line. The hooks hum in their measured way. The tar pot keeps its quiet pond of brown. The second coil rests under its canvas strap. A third begins as 3 new strands accept their contrary agreement. The top travels like a shepherd who knows every stone on the path. At the splicing trestle, the journeyman turns the finished shore tie over once more and dresses its throat with a soft wipe of tar. He rubs the seizing with his thumb so it drinks and forgets fuzz. He eschews its oval calmly. He places a length of parceling over the throat, then wins a short serving of marline clothes, even turns purely to withstand the company of bollards and posts. When the last turn lies flat, he knots and presses the knot with a thumbnail so the cord will remember to be modest. A gentle side note, much of this work is reminders. Knots are reminded to stay low, fibers are reminded to lie with their neighbors. Even tar is reminded to be present without boasting. Down the hall the four-turner oils a bearing once, listens, then not again. He draws a fingertip along the lined shaft to feel the heat. Warm is good, hot is restless. The belt receives a small rub of tallow. Its hiss fades to a polite whisper. He opens the near door an inch and closes the far door a whisper to keep a draft aligned with lamps rather than against them. The cat lifts its head, approves, and resumes being a folded idea. The foreman measures a fresh lay with his hands alone. He grips the new rope, thumbs apart, and looks where the strands cross his knuckles. The angle is right. He sets the top a breath higher, a hint the strands accept without answering. The bell at 50 yards ticks once as if taking attendance. The boy, using a bone-fed, tucks a wisp of nap into a small hollow. His gestures now look like someone who has forgotten he is learning and begun simply to do. At the serving bench, longer parceling continues along the section that will see weather first, a stretch beyond the eye, and the part that will chafe against timbers. Strips of tarred canvas spiral with the lay, edges overlapping like tidy roof tiles. Over that the serving mallet travels heart-shaped head, groove burnished with years of tar, slinging marline in tight collars that lie against one another without quarreling. The Malay's tapping is the Ropewalk's heartbeat. The foreman checks the wrap by running a knuckle along it. Even. He smiles with an eyebrow. A messenger from the block shop appears with his apron dusted in fine wood curls. He carries two new sheaves, elm turned round and smooth, their bronze bushings small suns in the lamplight. He sets them on a bench and leaves a plank tag that reads in careful pencil, "For double purchase, want soft lane fall." The foreman nods to the note, sets the sheaves side by side, and chooses a coral from earlier with a lay that will feed over wood without sulking. Tools speak to each other in this hall without needing interpreter. A gentle side note, soft lane rope pays smoothly around sheaves, hard lane holds shape in standing rigging. The difference is not drama, only a conversation about future behavior. Proving continues for the second hawser. The lever descends, the rope lifts its shoulders, the lay tightens like handwriting, leaning a degree more left. The foreman watches not for failure, but for temperament. The rope sings a low, even syllable that dies politely when the lever rises. Satisfied, he prints the wax stamp at the end, tiny top, and 3 lines, then wipes stray tar from the stamp with a leaf of parceling so the next impression will be honest. Breaks happen on the half-hour by the lamps, never all together. Tea is poured, sugar taken or not taken without comment. Bread is consulted. Cheese behaves. Someone produces 2 slices of apple saved earlier. The apple's fresh green smell visits the tar for a moment and leaves both unchanged but amused. The boy holds his mug with 2 hands, as if any heat that leaves the rim will choose his fingers. The ledger continues to receive its plain poetry. Hawser 8, 120 FMS, good lay, I.N. serving for bollard, lead line 60 FMS, Matthew Walker at end, tar batch B. The foreman's script is firm but unhurried, the kind of hand that trusts the next line will have space. Beside one entry he draws a tiny rectangle with a dot shop shorthand for parceling added. The far doors breathe, then still. A short rain showers the roof and runs away. It is heard as a softened hiss in the rafters, nothing more. Inside the smell turns briefly cooler, then returns to pine and hemp. Humidity is checked again with the small hanging yarn. Its curl holds the same modest spiral. The foreman lifts the tar ladle once, and lets a thin thread fall. It thins neatly and breaks without stringing. Enough heat. Enough. They make a few whippings for future ends. Tight collars of marline worked close to a rope's cut to keep it from untruth. The boy practices on a short offcut, working his turn snug, adding a frapping turn that bites cleanly, and finishing with a reef knot laid flat. His knot sits like a quiet button. The journeyman nods the smallest nod, permission for the boy to be pleased in private. A gentle side note: praise lives here in the space between things, fewer corrections. A tool left in reach, a task given without preface. Near 3 in the morning the top finishes another walking lesson. The third core grows at the near end loop over loop, each laid with the rope's natural leash. No kinks are permitted to practice. No crossings are allowed to rehearse bad ideas. The coil is toggled with canvas and wood, then rolled to arm's lengths aside to cure in its new shape for a while. The foreman chalks its end with a small cross, meaning first splice done, second pending. Ledger receives the mark quietly in words. The boy sweeps a scattering of tow into a neat heap and carries it to the oakum sack. He presses the sack's mouth flat and ties it with twine that asks no show. He oils the fid with a drop rubbed in by thumb so wood will stay patient. The marline spike is wiped and set point inward, the Ropewalk's way of saying safe even when sleepy. Lamps are trimmed once more, chimneys lift and return with the small ring of glass on iron that halls learn to love. 2 riggers arrive from the slips, coats dark with a day that has not started, caps pulled down against a rain that left 5 minutes ago. They walk the length, hands behind backs, and stop at the coils as if visiting old friends. They test a lay with thumbs, lift a short length, feel for temper at the eye and nod. For no. 3 pier, one says. The foreman chalks pier 3 on the coil's toggle and flips a page in the ledger to the orders column. The riggers shoulder a light coil the lead line and carry it away with an ease learned from small boats and long days. Their footsteps on the boards diminish without ever becoming hurried. A gentle side note: rope leaves halls and becomes weather. Makers rarely see where their work learns its real job. Ledger lines take the place of tides in those stories. The proving bench is put at rest, its lever rises with dignity and waits. The serving mallet hangs grooved down from its peg to keep dust out of habit. The top is set point inward on the shelf, the cones would still warm from purposeful hands. The tar pot is skinned and covered with its thin tin lid, not to end the night, only to keep the surface from learning a skin too thick to be friendly. Work resumes on a smaller commission, a pair of earrings short lengths to lash the clue of a sail soft lane, and barely served, meant to be nimble. The journeyman lays and splices them almost in one breath, hands remembering a shorter dance. He tests each by pulling hard and quick, then harder and slower. Both answers are agreeable. He stamps the ends lightly and writes pair earrings, loft in the margin of the ledger page. A messenger from upstairs will collect them when the first pail is on the windows. The cat wakes fully, stretches until its back makes a question mark, then walks the chalk line to the tar pot and sits with front paws tucked, a small, satisfied loaf of animal. The boy pretends not to be pleased. Before dawn, they set out a handy billy fall to small blocks, and a soft lane fall line to test the sheaves from the block shop. The line runs over elm without whispering, the blocks turn without sulking. The foreman smiles with one side of his mouth and nods to the empty doorway, which is as good as sending a thank you up the yard. The last lay of the night begins. Hooks hum, yarns tighten, strands lean, the top coaxes, tar follows. The bell, certain of its small duty, touches its own patience at the chalk mark. Boots take their left of the rise in the 9th bay and right of the thinner board in the 12th. The ledger's pencil rests a moment, point flat, as if waiting for the daylight to take the sentence. The foreman looks toward the far door, where a pale different from lamplight begins to form, thin as skimmed milk. He closes one lamp, then another, leaving the nearest and farthest lit for a while longer so the hall will not feel abrupt. He feels the rope with both hands, one in front of the top, one behind. Satisfied, he murmurs steady, a word that here is a benediction more than an instruction. Soon carts will roll, gulls will begin their counting, and a clerk's neat hat will appear with the first ink of day. But the hall is still night for a few breaths yet. And in that small grace the rope remembers what it is for, to carry load and weather toward, and to bring ships back by holding. Dawn begins like a lighter color in the far doorway, not bright yet, only thinner. The Ropewalk answers by breathing a fraction deeper. Lamps are trimmed one more time, two are snuffed, and to remain like bookends for the last quiet pages. The tar pot keeps low heat, a steady brown pond with a soft skin that is lifted and folded back as if turning down a blanket. One more lay is finishing. The top glides in the foreman's hands, no squeeze, just guidance. Strands lean toward one another with the contentment of neighbors who have agreed to share a fence. At the bell mark, the small spoon sound taps and fades. The boy follows on without being asked, laying a new yarn where an older one thins, his chalk kiss small and tidy. He no longer watches his fingers, they have learned to watch for themselves. A gentle side note, there is a moment when a task stops borrowing attention and begins returning it. In shops like this, that moment is quiet and plenty. The new rope reaches the near cradle. Stoppers are wrapped and snug. The four-turner slows the hooks to stillness and lifts the safety bar with one practice hand. The rope rests in the cradle, warm, tar-scented, calm. The foreman tests the lay with a thumb, then a knuckle, then with the memory in his wrist, he nods. He reaches for the tar mop and draws one last even stroke along the fresh length, a finishing pass like a barber's smooth hand over a close shave. Shine arrives and then tucks itself away. Splicing happens again, quickly now a modest shore tie for a pier ring, free tucks into more, throat seized with tarred marline. The fid moves like a polite suggestion. The marline spike persuades without argument. The finished tie sits on the canvas and looks complete without making a scene. It receives its wax-stamped tiny top, and 3 lines and a chalk dot that means destination known, purpose clear. Proof follows. The proving bench asks the new length to meet itself with good temper. The lever descends, the rope hums low and even, the lay holds an honest angle. A roller offers a nervous chirp, and is answered with 1 drop of oil. The lever rises again. The rope relaxes without forgetting. Ledger gains 2 lines. Hawser 7, 90 FMS. Proved short tie bollard. The foreman's hand is as neat as ever. Letters like small ships with tidy sails. They coil the new rope. Loops fall with the rope's natural wish, each set down and turned the right way so no kink learns to be a habit. The boy slides a canvas pad beneath the coil to keep boards clean. A wooden toggle and strap settle the bundle to good manners. Chuck notes length and use. The coil rolls to arm lengths to cure and becomes a sleeping spiral with a small pride. A gentle side note, coiling is not a dismissal but a promise. A rested rope behaves. The serving bench hosts one last task. Parceling spirals are on the section beyond the eye. Then the serving mallet races its groove along the rope, marline singing into firm bands. The mallet's soft tapping makes a line of sound that could count breaths. The journeyman finishes with a reef knot pressed flat and a thumb-smooth dab of tar. The served length looks like thought written carefully. Tools begin to migrate toward their homes. The fit is wiped and oiled, grain warm and grateful. The marline spike lies with point inward. The top rests on its shelf, point toward the wall. The serving mallet hangs groove down. Brushes dangle bristle down from pegs. The tar ladle is cleaned along its lip and set to drain. Hackles receive their toothbrush. Iron teeth return to good order. The broom of split bamboo follows the chopped line once, snapping fresh white from top cord. The hall likes that sound. A cart arrives at the near doors as the light climbs from gray to milk. 2 riggers step down with their shoulders already squared to the day. They lift the first coil, the mooring hawser between them, on a pole wrapped in cloth where hands sit. The coil rises and sways once, then settles into a walk rhythm. The foreman chalks pier 3 again on the toggle. Ledger receives a brief note, sent to pier by 2. Nothing more is needed. The cart rolls away, wheels polite, leaving the smell of wet boards and a promise. A gentle side note, most departures are like this. No fanfare. The work simply goes where it belongs. The boy takes a bundle of oakum to the doorway and hands it to a caulker passing toward the slips. Tar and salt answer each other in their shared scent. A nod passes both ways. The cat stands, stretches, performs a slow question mark of spine, and relocates to a patch of floor that has just learned sun. Its paws need air once, then fold. There are small errands yet. A pair of earrings for the sail loft are wrapped in paper and tied with twine. The tag says loft in pencil. The block shop sheaves are tested again with a handy billy fall, line over elm. No complaint. A short length is whipped for the clerk who prefers tidy ends on his desk. The blue mug emptied returns to its ledge, handle to the left. Someone moves it a finger farther from the edge without looking, a habit that remembers a night when something nearly learned to fall. Lamps are pinched out in sequence from far to near so the hall keeps its sense of direction. Wicks are trimmed, chimneys wiped, caps set. The stove is dozed to a safer glow. The tar pot is covered with its thin lid to keep a skin from waking in daylight. Doors are opened a little more. Air walks through. The chalk line looks bright, and the long boards learn morning. The foreman stands at the center of the hall and listens once more to silence that is not empty but full of unhurried endings. He writes one last line in the ledger. Night steady. Tar easy. Hands good. He closes the book, presses its cover with the flat of his palm, and sets it under the shelf where records sleep. A gentle side note. Closing a ledger is a kind of benediction. It tells the room that the story of the hours has been kept. Boots scuff toward the doors. Daymen will come with their larger voices and the particular cheerful chaos of delivery. Carts will clatter. Gulls will try opinions. A clerk's neat hat will appear and make a count. The Ropewalk will accept the change without fuss, straight as ever, ready to be quiet again when evening returns, and the hooks hum like small engines of patience. Before leaving, the foreman touches the third cora, and then the second, a hand laid flat, no patting, just contact. He looks to the boy and nods toward the top. The boy sets it pointing the right way without being told. He glances down the length where night was a companion, and now is only a phrase. He thinks, but does not say, that the hall feels longer in daylight and truer at night. Both things can be true. They step outside. The yard smells of wet canvas and early tea of pitch and tide. Masts show their lines against a sky that has decided on pale blue. A gull makes an uncommitted comment. Somewhere a bell on a buoy remarks on distance. The Ropewalk's doors rest open, not all the way enough to say we are here when you need us. The cat, last guardian, wanders to the threshold, sits, and blinks at the morning. It is satisfied with the way the night has been folded away. The rope, coiled and stamped, waits to learn the names of cleats, posts, and weather. It will lift, hold, pull, and pay out with decent manners. It will return ships by being honest. It will smell faintly of pine for a long time, even in storms. For now it rests. And with that, the long haul can let its breath go. Night work, finished without hurry, becomes the day's quiet strength. Now these stories will keep you company as you rest. Thank you for listening, and sweet dreams.